Just being surrounded by such beauty and wisdom has been a real honour. So thank you ever so much to Greg and to Big Phil and to Gawain.
Borrow my glasses.
Yes, precisely.
Actually, I didn't bring mine with me today. I must have not too much, too much sherry over Christmas, no doubt. And thank you for your company as well today, all of your lovely messages. I am going to be back on Monday, same time. I'm doing the 10 till 1 shift, so I hope to have your company again then. But in the meantime, do stay tuned to Talk, because there is so much more coming up today. Up next, of course, is the wonderful Ian Collins. He's just slipping into something more comfortable. He's going to be with you just after this next set of advert breaks. Have a gorgeous afternoon. I'll see you on Monday.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
Time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. Shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest. But I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
The Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public is not being told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia at the...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And yes, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody, to the home of common sense. Still Christmas, isn't it? Yeah, still Christmas time, tinsel and stuff. And we are loaded, rammed to the gills at this end. Lots to come, including this. Nigel Farage declaring Reform UK are now the real opposition in British politics, claiming the party has overtaken Tory party in membership. What is the truth of all of that? Is somebody monkeying around with the figures, or is it reasonable to say that Reform have well and truly usurped the blues? We'll have more on that shortly. Also this afternoon, a senior government advisor has said that Britain should move thousands of inmates into low-security open prisons to tackle the overcrowding crisis and reduce offending. Is that a good idea? As long as you don't sniff an injustice, then maybe it is. But I would warn with caution as to whether we go down that particular route. And also the Office of National Statistics has faced criticism for the low office attendance, with some offices having less than 5% attendance at times, despite errors in key statistics this year. I don't even know what that sentence even means, but it's something about folk not coming to work, right? and we love that. We'll have more of that a little later in the programme. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. And the number, of course, 0344 499 1000. Can I ask this question? Which Reform UK policy appeals to you the most? If I said set aside immigration, for example, where would you go with that answer? And let me just add this as well before we come to the nuts and bolts of this story. If you've never before been that interested in politics, if it's never floated your boat in the conventional way, you read a couple of headlines and then you move on. I think there's a lot of people in the country, perhaps even most people in the country, unfortunately, have that relationship with news. There's too much else going on in life maybe to get hot and bothered about what is happening with Labour, the Tories, Reform, Lib Dem. I've got a busy life. I need to crack on. So if that's previously been your disposition, the one thing that must have changed it for some would be surely the arrival of Reform UK. By any standard, this is one of the most interesting, fascinating things that has happened to British politics in decades, and there's a number of reasons behind it. We can talk about the F factor, the Farage factor, a very persuasive, mesmeric bloke who, and I use the word bloke advisedly in this term, because he's a bloke that speaks your language. Now, there will be people who don't buy into the kind of Farage thing, in the same way there's people that don't buy into the Trump thing, and there's obvious connections and correlations in the Venn diagram there. But he is the figurehead, if you like. He's the master of all of this, the only bloke, and I've known the man for many years, who can turn up to give a speech without a script, who will always have an answer, might not be your flavour of answer, but he's able to communicate. Now, you'd need a psychologist maybe to get into the nitty-gritty of what it is about certain orators or politicians that are able to make that connection, even if there's other things, in their backstory. And I say that Nigel Farage, he's a publicly private school educated posh boy who worked in the city, couldn't be more establishment if he tried. But despite that, still connects. Yeah, Boris Johnson was able to do that. And believe it or not, to a degree, so was Jeremy Corbyn. And that's always been a big area, certainly for me, of fascination, is those ones that can connect. Is it in the voice? Is it in the style of delivery? What is the specifics behind that? And then, of course, so there's the obvious factor. The F factor would be massive, right top of the list. Nigel Farage is the reason why I am now a Reform UK member. Nigel Farage is the reason I voted Reform at the last election. And that makes total sense. That should not be a mystery to anybody. But I think perhaps more fundamentally would be the collapse, if you like, of the Conservative Party. There's nothing, I'm not saying anything new here, but the collapse of the Conservative Party under some pretty woeful administrations over the last decade. You look back at it and think, blimey, David Cameron was a breath of fresh air. When you look at what we've had, from Theresa May through to Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, thought he was going to be good, turned out to be disastrous, and on the list goes. But of course, Boris Johnson was once the Nigel Farage of politics. Of course, people saw him and voted for him and embraced him in that kind of way. But either way, whatever way you slice it, as Nigel Farage himself said, the newest party in political history has overtaken the oldest party in the world. I mean, Reform UK have been there for half an hour and they've pitched up, they've said the right things, they've talked the talk, and they've been able to persuade, mostly, I would say, disgruntled Conservatives, that they are the party of the future. They are a party that has the true Conservative values. The last lot, particularly under Sunak, sort of just lost its mojo, really. It lost its whole purpose, its meaning. Stuff was happening that just wasn't particularly Conservative. A lot of what is happening with Keir Starmer now, if the truth be known, and neither the left or the right quite like this reality check, but actually much of what Starmer is doing was already on the list for Sunak to do. He would have probably followed some of those same instructions into a closer ties with the EU. And there might be good business reasons behind some of it, and perhaps suspicious reasons behind the rest. But either way, there was a loss of trust, and it happened spectacularly. They looked tired, they looked knackered. Reform come along, speaking your language, and that is it. But it wouldn't be unfair. And by the way, I should mention specifically Richard Tice. Richard Tice is one of the most noble, decent blokes I know. He's the man that genuinely, I think, is the kind of the mechanism, the nuts and bolts, the inner workings of reform. And I know Nigel is that figurehead, but I think Richard Tice is just supremely officious, on it, gets it, understands it, can read the room, can see the roadmap, is able to pinpoint the direction of travel, all of those things, and a thoroughly decent man thrown in there as well. So you've got all of that going on, but they've got 5 MPs. They're not big at the moment in Westminster terms, but the suggestion here is they are big in membership terms. And Kemi Badenoch is having none of it. She's accused Mr Farage of faking Reform membership figures. This was after Reform posted details that they now have more than 132,000 people who've joined the party. That's up from 100,000 just last month. And it's higher than the 131,680 members declared by the Conservative Party during its leadership election this year. So you have this curious situation where, and you know how this is going to pan out. It will probably just end up fading away at the end of the week. I think the suggestion is that the counting system is could be at odds with the reality. And you can't really get into the reality because those figures aren't made public. That's the suggestion from the Tories. But either way, let's give everybody the benefit of the doubt. They're kind of neck and neck. They're in the same ballpark. 132,000. That's the sort of figure that both of them are at. And that's a party that is the newest party in the UK, up their level in terms of membership with the oldest party on planet Earth. So that in itself, whether it's a few thousand here or a few thousand there, I'm not really that interested. Doesn't affect. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn had 500,000 members of Labour when he was leading it. So it doesn't always lead to anything, but it's a kind of interesting little nugget to chew into here. What I'm fascinated by on this is, what is it about reform? If you put aside immigration, just put that aside, because they are the only party that is talking the talk to that group of people. No one else is doing that. The Tories aren't doing it. So they've picked up the mantle from where I was about to say from where the Tories left off. They never started, really. They're never serious on this stuff. So other than that, because we know about immigration, we know that they lead the way in all polls when it comes to parties that will do something about immigration. Put that aside. What else? Is it what's the education policy, the health policy, defence policy? What is it about reform that appeals to you the most? They currently, according to their tracker, by the way, actually have 141,119 votes. So this story is probably only going to put it through the roof even more. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Let's get a word on this with Charlie Downs, political commentator and all-round good bloke. Happy Christmas to you, Charlie.
Cheers, Ian. Merry Christmas to you too.
Nice to have you with us, as ever. I mean, let's just start then on that story of reform. It's an extraordinary tale, claiming that they have officially passed the Conservatives' membership numbers. Let's have a listen to Mr Farage's reaction yesterday.
We're there now.
How many more to go? In fact,
we've done it. We're through. We're through. How about that? The official opposition. It's going to be a long day.
So there it is. What are you making of this then, Charlie? I mean, there seems to be a little bit of a squabble between Mr Farage and Kemi Badenoch on how these numbers were arrived at. What's your take on this?
Oh, reform, where to begin? So I've been in the kind of reform orbit for a couple of years at this point. I did an internship with them when I was at university, so I've known these people for quite a while. I've been a supporter of them, kind of on and off over the course of those few years. I think that the Conservative Party is dead. I'm not a conservative. I don't think of myself as a conservative. I think that conservatism as a political ideology is not what's needed in this country right now, because it's far too cautious, it's far too afraid of radical change. But right now what we need in this country is radical change. And I belong to a contingent, a small contingent, but rapidly growing contingent of young people who have a real appetite for something a little bit more radical, a little bit more exciting, a little bit more forward-facing. And I think that that is really what reform is tapping into. However, what I would say is that the question in politics is always of quality as against quantity. So I think that it's impressive that Reform have more members than the Conservative Party now. But if that doesn't translate to real policy and a real offering, then it doesn't really mean anything. Because your question there about which Reform policy is one's favourite, I think is actually quite a difficult question to answer, because I don't really see much in the way of a real meaty kind of policy platform that they're offering people. And this, I think, is the problem with populism, because as much as conservatism is a discredited ideology, I actually think populism is not all it's cracked up to be. I think populism is more of a style. It's more of a rhetorical style than it is an actual...
It's a feeling as well, isn't it?
Exactly. It's a vibe. It's a vibe. It's a style, more than it is an actual political platform. Because populism really is just giving the crowd what it wants, whereas leadership is taking the crowd forward, telling the crowd what they need. And that I don't think anybody is really doing in British politics at the moment. And maybe this is a fundamental problem with democracy, because it does kind of select for leaders who do just give the crowd the red meat that they want. But I think that if Reform and Farage are to move beyond merely being outside agitators and transition into being a potential party of government, I think we need to see a transition away from this kind of old boys down the boozer, like it's all jokes and and a bit of fun thing, to an actual serious offering. Because again, as I say, I am somebody who is, I'm deeply skeptical of liberalism. I think that liberalism has failed. I think that this country has been on the wrong course basically for my entire life. I was born in 2001. I've only ever known this nation as an economic zone, a multicultural space that doesn't really have much in the way of its own culture, has no kind of desire to defend, protect, promote, and maintain its own culture. I look at the offerings when it comes to the economy, and I think, I'm getting married next year. How the hell am I ever going to afford a house? Because the housing market is so in such tatters because of immigration and various other economic policies. That is the kind of edifice that young people are looking at.
Yeah.
And we don't want the kind of all singing, all dancing thing that Reform kind of is right now. We want a serious, a kind of quite intense.
So so are you a sort of tacit Reform supporter now? As you say, you did work experience with them. You've been on and off in terms of unequivocal support. Where are you at the moment then on this scale, Charlie?
Well, as I say, yeah, I did a work experience with them, and I have also worked for them as well. And so I know this machine from the inside reasonably well. I think that Reform is the best vehicle for kind of radical politics of the type that I represent to actually make its way into the halls of power. And I think that in our system, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think that there has to be a recognition of the fact that no other meaningful alternative is going to come into existence between now and the next general election. And I don't think the Conservative Party, I think there's some real talent there, but I think that it's dominated by incredibly mediocre, incredibly unimpressive.
Yeah, and I absolutely right. Mediocre is the right word. And you look back at the kind of, when people talk about Thatcher, that whole era, which was a very defined example of what conservatism is. It was about change. They were kind of, if you like, the Reform Party of that era back in the 70s, when Labour were falling apart all over the place. And along came Mrs T with a big, bold idea. That was real reform.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, as much as we can look back at these figures like Thatcher, I actually think part of Reform's problem is they are too reliant on kind of drawing on these motifs from the past. Because you look at their economic platform and it's entirely Thatcherite. You listen to the kind of appeals they make and it's all kind of Churchill and World War II imagery. And I think that I'm going to be honest with you, that just doesn't play anymore. It doesn't have the bite that it used to have. Because when it comes to the economic side, young people especially, what we're crying out for is not the free market. We don't want free trade and freedom and this sort of thing. We've had that. And what that's done is it's turned our country into an economic zone that doesn't have a culture. What we want is economic security. What we want is the ability to own private property and buy it at a reasonable price. And I also worry as well with reform about the social side, because I look at the fact that 3 out of their 5 MPs voted in favour of assisted dying. I also look at the way that they treat critics like my friend Connor Tomlinson and Miriam Cates, the way that the criticisms, legitimate criticisms about the lack of platform are received. And it's always in very bad faith. That, I think, is concerning. I think that this, and I say this as a critical friend, I'm a member of the party. I'm one of these 100 and however many thousand members. All I want to do is see this party become what it could be. Because you look at the European scene, you look at the kind of the right-wing dissident parties in Europe, you look at the National Rally in France, the AfD in Germany, the Freedom Party in Austria, and these are serious, young, radical parties. And they are taking that continent by storm. They are absolutely sweeping. The AfD is polling to win the next general election in Germany, not least because of the problems of migration that they've had, especially recently. And if you look at the UK situation, I just think that reform is not quite occupying that vacuum yet. And I'll tell you why I say that. It's because there are still elements within the Conservative Party that are able to flank reform from the right. If you looked at Robert Jenrick's leadership campaign, he was saying things that reform were not prepared to say. He was calling for mass deportations of illegal migrants. He was calling for a reduction of migration to zero, whereas reform are still unprepared to have these conversations. And I think this idea that you need to play to the centre, this idea that you need to be moderate, I think fundamentally misunderstands the mood of the country, because the mood of the country, and again, as I say, as speaking as a young person, especially for young people, we want radicalism. We want something with a little bit of spice, a little bit of edge to it. We don't want this kind of milquetoast conservative kind of politics. You know, we want something that's actually going to change this country.
OK, Charlie, stay with us. Charlie Downs, political commentator, with us, telling it like it is, his view of reform, a party of which he is one of those 141,000 plus people that are members, according to Reform UK's own website. We'll have more from Charlie in a couple of moments' time. Lines are open for your comments too, in terms of that question in particular. Which reform policy appeals to you most, aside from immigration? We'll have more of that coming next on Talk.
Let's talk about Kemi Badenoch, Conservative Party leader. Yesterday we were talking about the strategy of the Conservatives and why it seems that they are waiting to cut through. On Christmas Eve, I think it was, Kemi Badenoch gave an interview to Amal Rajan, or it was released then, saying that she's not going to just come up with policy off the hoof. She wants to really think things through, and was having a bit of a dig at reform about that.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
This comes in from Gary, who says, the glaring difference between Reform and all other parties is its attitude to climate change. Labour, the Conservatives, Lib Dems are all obsessed with driving our economy into the ground in the pursuit of net zero. Reform, the only party that recognises the folly of that and offers something different. And you are kind of forced to think, well, if they were in the same way that Charlie was just saying, there is some are sensing that Reform's a very forthright approach to immigration, as an obvious example, has somewhat softened, small but significantly, in terms of what it once was. And, you know, are we likely to see that with things like net zero, that as we approach the next election, there are some changes there as well? Charlie Downs is with us, the political commentator. Let's move on to everybody's favourite politician, Charlie, Rachel Reeves. Experts have warned that she's heading for another tax raid as the economy continues to slug behind all expectations. Could this mean that she ends up breaking her pledge? And it's worth reminding ourselves of what she was promising in the budget.
I will not increase your national insurance. I will not increase your VAT, and I will not increase your income tax. Working people will not see higher taxes in their payslips as a result of the choices that I am making today. That is a promise made and a promise fulfilled.
There it is, no income tax, no VAT. Where's she going to get the money from, Charlie?
Well, from us, by the sounds of it. I mean, we were speaking before the break about the incredibly unimpressive offering from the Conservative Party, but, I mean, let's not even get started on the Labour Party, my goodness. Rachel Reeves is one of these people who you look at her and you just think, how have you managed to actually get this far? Because I work in, my day job is in politics, right? And I encounter people who work in the political world, and it's an incredibly cutthroat, incredibly Machiavellian, you meet some incredibly unscrupulous people in that world. And you look at someone like Rachel Reeves, who does appear to be a genuinely mediocre person in many different ways. And you just think, how the heck have you got to the position that you've got to? Anyway, aside from just insulting her, I do want to actually talk about this.
No, I absolutely share that. And it's true of so many politicians and even people who run industries as well, who somehow shinned up the corporate ladder or the political ladder. And no one's quite stopped to go, sorry, can we just take a step back 1 second? How good is this person? And you look at Rachel Reeves, and I know, she studied economics, and I'm sure she'd be all right on your pub quiz team, maybe. But I'm not looking for somebody to run the economy who's good on a pub quiz team. I want somebody who's got some real originality about them, some fire in their belly. I get none of this from her.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll get to the story in a sec, because it's easy and quite enjoyable to just sit here and slam Rachel Reeves because she is an unimpressive person. But you look at more broadly, you look at the type of person our political system selects for, and it seems to just be, every year, every election, they seem to just get worse. They seem to become more unimpressive, more just, completely blinkered. I was reading this story this morning, I couldn't help but think about the fact that there is the sense that the time horizon when we talk about economics and everything else, actually, for that matter, in the UK is like a couple of years. Like we're talking about in a couple of years. Like this story from the Mail talking about Reeves's tax hikes. It talks about April 2026. And then I sort of cast my mind to the east, and I think about China, and I think about the fact that they are thinking in the order of centuries. They are thinking, when they are doing their economic plans, they're thinking 40, 50, 60 years in the future. And I just look at our country and I think, we are floundering around, getting sort of caught up in these kind of trivial details of the here and now. And we're not thinking about the fact that this country is kind of, it's not in a good place. I mean, economically, we've had no growth for the last quarter. But beyond that, culturally, socially, it seems we're just breaking down, and that's largely due to immigration, but it's also due to a number of other things. It's everything I've been talking about so far on the programme today. It's the fact that for my entire life, this country has been nothing more than a kind of flat economic zone. You look at the priorities of our leaders, you look at what Reeves is talking about today, and it's just the most kind of myopic, short-sighted kind of policy making. because it's just, all of this does, all that tax does is it makes people poorer. It does not improve the economy. We have this idea, well, socialists have this idea that taxing people more is good for the economy, but it's not, because everywhere
No, it never will be. I mean, you don't
it
even
just
have
impoverishes.
To, yeah, even GCSE in maths should tell you that much. But I doubt whether this lot are going to be learning that very obvious kind of schoolboy lesson anytime soon. Let's just get a quick word on hospital tax. Hospitals collecting 1.15 billion in car park fees from patients over the last 5 or 6 years. NHS Trust made an average of 665,000 a day from parking charges, with recent increase in fees. And most of that revenue comes from patients attending appointments, with the remainder, of course, coming from staff who curiously have to pay. Even if you're a neurosurgeon about to slice somebody's scalp off, you've still got to put your 50p in the meter before you can pick up a scalpel.
Yeah, well, Ian, what I'm about to say might sound a little bit flippant, but I promise you there is actually a very serious point here. My fiancée, ever since I've been with her, she is so hyper aware of parking charges that she's so keen to park somewhere where you don't have to pay that we go on these, we'll park a mile away from the place we want to go to just so we don't have to pay.
To avoid it, yeah.
Indeed. Because if you actually look at the kind of towns and cities, even the villages of Britain, there is nowhere that you can park without paying. And I actually think that says, as much as it is an annoyance, but as much as it might seem like something quite trivial, I think that actually says a lot about the priorities in this country, because it's like, it's just nickel and diming everywhere. And the fact, this story, that we are doing that even in hospitals where people are going to get treatment for potentially, maybe they might be dying. The fact you're making those people pay for the privilege of sitting and sitting there for a few hours is just insane. And actually, I'm very much in favour of the existence of the NHS. I think that universal healthcare paid for by the taxpayer is an incredibly good idea. As much as I was just criticising socialism, I do think there are certain things that, I really hate this American attitude that it's none of my business if my neighbour gets cancer, because it's kind of like that's your countryman, and maybe we should have a little bit more sort of, I don't know, compassion than that. But I think the NHS in its current form is a complete mess, and I think that it's in dire need of reform. And I think that this is one such area, because it's absurd to charge people for parking at hospitals.
Well, it's just become a thing, isn't it? Everything, the idea that any local authority or institution would not charge for parking is now unthinkable. They just wouldn't do that. It's just become... No one ever said, I tell you what, why don't we not charge for parking? Let's do that. Let's not charge for parking, because all right, you've got to upkeep the tarmac and stuff like that, and paint the lines and stuff. But it's become such a frenzy that it's now unthinkable that you would do anything else. Listen, final story, just a quick word on this, if you could, Charlie. We are short of time. Just Stop Oil facing criticism for selling T-shirts. Nothing wrong with selling T-shirts, of course. It's a good thing if you're a campaign organisation. Frankie says you need one of those T-shirts that's got something emblazoned on the front. The problem that the Just Stop Oil cool cats have got is that these T-shirts were made in the Dominican Republic and were shipped 4,000 miles to the UK. So there's a little bit of a carbon footprint issue going on here. Not a good look for Just Stop Oil.
I think something that we have to move away from thinking of organisations like Just Stop Oil as being somehow radical, as being somehow, fighting the power. Because if you look at what Just Stop Oil are advocating for, it's in complete lockstep with what the government want, with what the civil service want, with what the HR departments of corporations like Amazon want, with what the NGOs want, with what the universities want, with what the media promote. They are the foot soldiers of the power structure that currently governs us. And so this narrative that they are somehow radical and fighting the power is complete nonsense. And so, we shouldn't be surprised that they don't kind of live their principles, that they do import T-shirts and merchandise from thousands of miles away, because they don't represent anything real. There is no authenticity to these organisations, because they exist to provide a kind of fashionable young face to what amount to state-sponsored programs that actually, when the rubber hits the road, make everyone poorer, as in the case of climate change. I actually think what your texter was saying about reform taking net zero and that sort of thing seriously is very true, because there is a real serious conversation to be had about the way in which environmental policies actually affect normal people. Because again, I'm very much in favour of protecting the environment. I think that this beautiful garden of a country that we have inherited is our duty to maintain it and make sure that it remains a natural and incredible place, beautiful environmental sort of concerns. And I just don't see the kind of politics that organisations like Just Stop Oil promote, and the interest groups that it represents, which are very powerful, wealthy lobbies. I don't think they have that vision. I think that this is kind of they lean more towards the Ed Miliband vision of environmentalism, which is just carpeting the countryside with industrial.
Yes. I think that's quite generous to call it a vision. It's a sort of obsession, maybe, but whatever it happens to be. Listen, Charlie, we stop there. It's still Christmas. We'll let you get back to the eggnog and twiglets. Charlie Downs with us, political commentator. Thanking him. We're going to talk to Tim Montgomery and also Conservative campaigner Jack Barwell in a moment as well, just on this question of Reform's membership overtaking the Conservative membership. Is that just an algorithm? Is it like, as much of a much as a couple of hundred, few thousand in it, whatever? Is it significant? We'll get some detail and some more comment on that. And over to you as well, on the point of Reform UK. What is the policy? What specific policy is it? What is it about reform that appeals to you? And if you just park the immigration issue, for which they kind of lead the way in having a robust idea of what they would do, even if you disagree with it. That aside, what would be the policy or the area of Reform UK that does it for you? Where is that policy magnet? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Just gone 25 to 2. So Reform UK claiming that the party has now overtaken the Tories in membership numbers. So here's how it stands. Current state of play. This is according to the website. Tories have 131,680 members. Reform UK on their own tracker says 141,376, so 10,000 more. The newest political, I'm slightly paraphrasing Nigel Farage, the newest political party on the block, been going about 20 minutes, are outsmarting the oldest political party on planet Earth. That's significant. There's a row about this, of course. The Tories are not happy. Joining me now to talk about this, founder of Conservative Home and former Number 10 advisor, Tim Montgomery. Afternoon to you, Tim.
And is it too early to wish you Happy New Year, Ian?
No, it's all right. I was just trying to work out whether are we still in the Happy Christmas mode or are we Happy New Year mode? I don't know. Either way, it's, yeah.
Well, Happy Christmas and Happy New Year.
Well, I was about to reflect exactly that, and the same back to you as well. Always good to talk, Tim. I mean, this is interesting. There's a bit of a row over, you know, digital algorithms and how stuff works, which seems to be, and it sounded quite desperate stuff from Kemi Badenoch, to be honest, that she's, you know, talking about fake news, and it's something about the ticker. It just automatically gives you an uptick when it might not mean it's a full member. I mean, this is like quite desperate stuff, really.
Well, I wondered whether she had too many sherries with her cold turkey yesterday. Yeah, that was my suspicion. And you've introduced me as founder of Conservative Home, but I should, of course, declare that I recently joined Reform.
Yes, I should have. We should have mentioned that. Of course, you are literally a very high-profile convert to Reform UK.
Well, I don't know about that, but that's probably where my bias lies. Look, yesterday there was all this talk on Twitter, on X, about APIs and back ends of websites, and to be honest, it all went over my head a little bit. But what Nigel Farage challenged Kemi Badenoch to was say, you know, invite one of the big four accountancy firms in, and they'll, you know, certify our figures. Yeah. Will you certify yours? And I think that if this row is going to go on, let's have a real, you know, independent evaluation of whether it's Reform or the Conservative Party or both that's telling the truth. But I don't quite...
Sorry, Tim, I was just going to compound that point by just saying, even if it's roughly the same, I mean, it's still a massive story, right? You know, as Mr Farage said himself, you know, the newest political party overtaking the oldest one is significant.
Absolutely. And I honestly think that, I can't remember the exact figure, maybe you've got it at hand, Ian, but another 400-odd people illegally crossed the channel on Christmas Day.
Correct.
So look, if 400 people can cross the channel on Christmas Day, I'm not surprised that 6,000 people in one day joined Reform.
Yeah.
People are very angry about what's happening in our country. You know, people are basically coming across our borders and we don't seem to be doing anything about it. And that makes people angry. And if 6,000 people think their way of protesting is to join Reform, well, I think that is perfectly explicable, actually.
I think, I don't think anybody should struggle to get their heads around that. That's just a very basic point of fact there. But in terms of the wider issue, one of the questions we're throwing out is, aside from immigration, what is the attraction to Reform UK? And you're probably in a good position to answer this, Tim, bearing in mind you've been around the Westminster block for many, many years. You know where some of the bodies are buried. You know, you've got some pretty decent. Now, I thought I had a good contacts list, but I think yours is to die for in the realms of MPs, etc.
Well,
so you know the territory, and you're a very astute and trusted journalist. Beyond what is what's at the centre of all of this beyond immigration?
I think it's the fact, and I say this with a lot of regret, actually. My former party, the Conservative Party, was rejected soundly at the last general election because it had seemed to have failed. You know, all the things that it said it believed in, home ownership, low tax, control of migration, and keeping the streets safe of crime, you know, all the indicators on those things had gone in the wrong direction. And I didn't think Labour would do very well, but I'd genuinely be surprised at how quickly they've failed, how catastrophically they've failed. You know, the economy going in the wrong direction, immigration going up, you know, seemingly, you know, the way the pensioners have been treated. I don't need to spell it out for your viewers and listeners, Ian. And in that moment, I think people are seeing the wheels come off the policies of the two main parties, and they're wanting an alternative. And you're right, it can't just be immigration. Reform have to use the time they have over the next 2 or 3 years to develop policies where the wheels won't come off.
Yeah.
People are going to be incredibly suspicious and cynical about politics now because they've been let down by the two mainstream parties. And Reform really has a big opportunity, but the responsibility it has is bigger, actually, because if it comes forward with just, you know, ill-thought-out policies and adds to the sense of cynicism toward politics, you know, British democracy is in real trouble. So I want to play my small part in helping Reform be a credible party, not just a not just offering simple solutions.
And was that, just briefly, Tim, was that part of your thinking, that it wasn't that you were jumping ship from the party you've been a member of forever to a new party that was, obviously a centre-right party? The similarities kind of stopped there in many respects. Was it because you looked at Reform and thought, hang on, they've got loads of great policies, or because you thought you could help build on what needs to be done to if you like, fill the gap that the Tories had left?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think, Ian. I think they've got good policies, and I think they've got very good instinct. But, it's a young party. You're saying, it's been around for 20 minutes. Well, not much longer than 20 minutes, actually. It needs to build, go on from being a campaigning organisation to be a proper party with a manifesto. I think Nigel Farage would admit they're work in progress. But, the next general election's probably 4 years away, maybe longer.
Sure.
We've got time to build a manifesto that people can look at and say they've thought it through, they're ready for government. We're not ready there yet, but I think we can be.
Tim, as ever, thank you. Have a cracking new year. Tim Montgomery, founder of Conservative Home, former number 2 advisor. He defected, of course, a couple of weeks back now to Reform UK, having been a lifelong Tory. Let's speak with Jack Barwell, Conservative campaign manager. Since you've been hanging on, Jack, can I just check you are still a Conservative? You haven't defected in that time. You're not one of the new numbers on Reform's website.
I find Tim wonderful to listen to, but no, he didn't win me over, I'm afraid. Ian.
OK. What do you make of this story, then? I mean, whatever the finer details are, Kemi Badenoch saying, well, they're using some iffy data. If you look at the real data, it's nothing like that. But let's just give everybody the benefit of the doubt here. They're in similar territory in terms of membership, and this is quite something for a party that didn't exist a couple of years ago.
I think it could both be true that we don't know if the number is exactly accurate. And I think the other point that Kemi made is even more important, which is that the Conservatives haven't updated their list. So the Tory number may be higher, Reform are taking the number from the leadership election in the summer. But it's also true that Reform have had a massive growth in the number of members that they've got. And we should understand why they're doing that. They're appealing to people who feel that politics is letting them down, that we're just playing into a consensus of centrism that isn't representing anyone. And Reform are being willing to go there on some of the issues. I don't agree with them on all the issues, but you can respect the fact that they're saying the things that a lot of people are saying. And the Conservatives do need to work out a long-term strategy to speak to some of those alienated voters.
What do you sense as a Conservative, as a young Conservative as well, which is kind of quite crucial in this discussion, because the image a lot of people have is that those that are left in the Conservative Party, average age is about 117. They wear an awful lot of tweed and probably own a farm somewhere.
Well, you're quite right. The Conservative Party can't win elections unless they have a diverse coalition. When I ran the election campaign down in Exmouth during the general election, my young campaign team, I was actually one of the older members of the team. So there are young Conservatives out there, surprisingly, but they're feeling very alienated. They're not feeling like their views are being listened to. And a lot of us have grown up with a government that did some good things on education, on employment rates, but did not achieve enough while we were in government. And Tim pointed out migration. He's absolutely right about that. But what I would casually say to people in Reform is it's great to point out that the illegal migration is on an absolute high, and you can talk about the figures on Christmas Day. But this is now a Labour government. I'm waiting for Reform to turn their attack to Labour. If they truly believe they can win the next election, why are they still so sewn up on attacking the Conservatives? Because that just paints the image to me that all they're interested in doing is splitting the right-wing vote, rather than actually trying to present themselves as a government of the future.
Jack, we've seen from the United States, whether people like Donald Trump. I'm always suspicious, should I say, of the sort of fanboy position that people have on politicians. People have it with Nigel Farage, they had it with Jeremy Corbyn, Boris Johnson to a degree, Trump, these very sort of mesmeric figures, these real characters, if you like, regardless of whether you support them, that we see from time to time, have a great habit of hooking people in. And Trump did it with aplomb just in November. Nigel Farage has some of that going on. What have the Conservatives got to do then to sort of reinvigorate? Because that spot, I mean, I'm willing to believe that a lot of the Reform support is about a feeling rather than saying, I love their NHS policy or I think they're great when they talk about defence. It's a sort of a sense of someone speaking our language, and the Conservative Party over the last few years have stopped speaking people's language.
They have. I mean, 2 points there. Firstly, I don't think people can be in love with reforms policy on the NHS defence because I don't think we've heard one. And I think that goes to your point that it's more about a sort of vibe feel at the moment rather than actually policy. Now, you understand that. We're a long way out from a general election. But if reform want to be credible, they will have to put policies forward that are credible and actually add up economically, which their last manifesto didn't. Now, people will say the Tories haven't always done that as well. That's completely true. That's why they need to have a reset. I think the fundamental difference at the moment, the reason that people are buying into reform, is exactly what you say, Ian, that they have these figures that people absolutely love and they attract themselves to. And it's almost like in politics, you can't criticise those people. I don't see why it can't be right that Nigel Farage has called out quite rightly the state of illegal immigration, the fact that we need to bring working class people with us if we go on a strong climate change policy, the fact that tax rates are too high for people trying to get into work first time. I agree on all three of those points, but also be true that this is not really a party at the moment. Nigel Farage holds a lot of the leading shares. And when these people are buying these reform memberships, I want to know, are they actually going to get a vote in their candidates at the next general election? Will they be able to select local relevant people that can stand up for their constituents? Or will this all be centralised? Because the Conservatives, I'm hoping, are now going to embark on a policy of giving more power to local associations to pick the candidates of the future to revive their party. And I'm not sure that reform will be quite so open on that. So we should be able to criticise people where they're not running their parties well and point out that they're on the right side of a couple of crucial issues that are bringing ordinary people with them.
Yeah. Jack, thank you. Great to have you on. Jack Barwell, have a great new year. Conservative campaign manager. He's young. He's in that very small group at the moment, but he would argue growing group of young Tories. Badenoch's got to try and turn it around. Reform at the moment have the dressing room. The momentum is there. They are punching well above their weight. 5 MPs. And they're making headlines not because of a biased media or anything like that, because they are talking and engaging in subjects and with the language that people understand. That's just an irredeemable fact right now. But your thoughts on this? If you put immigration to one side just for a second, what are the specific policies or areas that gravitate you towards Reform UK? 0344 499 1000.
Let's talk about Kemi Badenoch, Conservative Party leader. Yesterday we were talking about the strategy of the Conservatives and why it seems that they are waiting to cut through. On Christmas Eve, I think it was, Kemi Badenoch gave an interview to Amal Rajan, or it was released then, saying that she's not going to just come up with policy off the hoof. She wants to really think things through, and was having a bit of a dig at reform about that.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
There's one in from Claire, who says, afternoon, the most important policy I see with reform is to do with migration, both legal and illegal. It encompasses all the other problems regarding high taxation, unemployment issues, house building, the building of our infrastructure, the NHS overload, lack of doctor appointments, lack of dentistry appointments, imported culture of knife crime, lack of social and culture and racial cohesion. And welcome Tim Montgomery to the fold. Claire, thank you for that. This from Danny, West Yorkshire. £2,000 tax £20,000 tax threshold would help younger people starting out in life to maybe save one day to buy their first house, and also help the rest of the public with the cost of living. If people have more money to spend, it would also help grow the economy. That's been duly reflected, that same point. The policy that enamors me, the most popular, is the raising of the tax threshold to £20,000. All I would say is it would be beyond extraordinary if they were ever able to do that. I mean, it's a great aspiration, and there's nothing wrong with aspirational policies when you're in opposition. You've got to show your direction of travel. But if reform were elected tomorrow, even if the books were looking better than they currently are, I don't imagine you would see a £20,000 tax threshold any time in the first 10 years of them being in power. I just can't imagine how you would finance that without cutting something so darn dramatic off. You'd probably have to have no army or navy to pay for it. But it's a great aspiration if they can do it. Maureen in East Sussex, what have you got for us, Maureen? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon. I've got scrapping net zero, the most commonsensical approach.
Yeah.
It was Richard Tice that made me aware that this nonsense was actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
I used to watch him on Talk back in the days.
Back in the day,
yes. I joined Reform in July 23, simply because of Richard Tice and Ben Habib, who is one of the most decent men I've ever seen.
It's interesting. Ben's been sort of not in the fold any longer, is he? Which is,
well,
I mean, maybe there's a way back for him. I don't know. I think there's been a few fallouts there. But, I mean, Richard Tice, you know, I said this at the beginning of the programme, Maureen, he's an absolute gentleman and a really lovely guy. And even if you disagree with him, his backstory as a businessman, his ideas and his motivation are thorough and decent.
I think he's there to keep them honest, so he was always going to bump up against Nigel Farage, wasn't he? I mean, at the end of the day. I mean, I'm no longer a member of Reform. I cancelled my subscription after the disgraceful way Nigel Farage treated Ben Habib, but I'll vote Reform despite Nigel Farage.
So you made your point known by no longer being an official member, but you would still vote for them?
Yeah, but you have to. There's no other alternative.
Were you a Tory before all of this, Maureen? And what was it about the Tory? But who was the figure or the single thing that seemed to happen with the Tories that you thought, this lot is a clown show, I can't vote for these people anymore?
They became the Uni-Party. There wasn't... Genuinely, I couldn't see any real reason to vote for either of those parties because they were all on a globalist WEF mindset. And we're British.
The kind of groupthink thing has never been more evident, has it really?
No.
I mean, the Conservatives, OK, they're meant to conserve. They're meant to conserve what is good and grow new branches and plant new roots into areas that, you know, that need to be addressed for the modern world. But they've failed on what seems all of those levels. And the fundamental point about, looking after the people in your country, whether it's pensioners, whether it's young people getting on the property ladder, whoever it happens to be, no longer seem to be a facet of the Tory party.
Absolutely. Of either party. I don't think the Lib Dems are any better than
They're still going, aren't they, the Lib Dems? I forgot about them. Dear old Ed Davey and his Christmas jumpers of doom.
He did get a bit wet in the campaign.
He did. Well, he's up for a giggle, I suppose. There is that. Maureen, great call. Thank you very much indeed. That's Maureen in East Sussex. No longer a Reform member, but she would vote for them. And it was, yes, the Richard Tice, and she mentioned Ben Habib there. His name's coming up quite a lot this afternoon. At the moment, he's not part of the inner circle of Reform. Could he find a way back? This one in from John. The Tories in terminal decline. Reform are a movement that goes from strength to strength. They have some great backers and will get bigger and stronger going forward. Could they unseat that stonking Labour majority? Could they beat the Tories at the next election? There is a school of thought that they would come back at the next election in sort of Lib Dem style with maybe 40, 50 seats. Fewer for the Tories and another landslide for Labour, which is a bit grim. 0344 499 1000. We'll do more comment from you in a few moments' time. Our lines are open. Lots to come in the next hour. First, the headlines at 2.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public is not being told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use by Ukraine.
Only farms.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. A whole load of stuff to get through this afternoon, including that story. Overnight, a row has broken out. Nigel Farage declaring Reform UK are the real opposition in British politics, claiming the party had overtaken the Tories in terms of membership. Kenny Badenoch firing back that this was a fake stat. Not a good look, but we'll examine and continue to discuss what it is about reform. Either way, there's a lot of new members going on over there. Either way, what is the deal when it comes to reform, other than immigration? Which policy is it that really enamors you? Also this afternoon, a senior government advisor has said that Britain should move thousands of inmates into low-security open prisons to tackle the overcrowding crisis and reduce offending. Well, it sounds like a no-brainer until you start putting, I don't know, a serial killer in an open jail. I doubt we'll get there, but you take the point. Details to come. And since Labour took office, 25 new arm's-length bodies, quangos, task forces and advisory councils have been set up. That's an average of one a week. What the heck is going on? Details on that too. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Jim says, a few people mentioned the 20,000 tax threshold that Reform have suggested they would introduce if they were in power. Jim says the 20,000 thing has been discussed on Talk many times. You haven't been paying attention if you claim they haven't explained. I didn't say they haven't explained it. I've had all of those MPs in the studio with me to explain it. My contention is I doubt very much whether it could be done. If you speak to an economist, they will certainly scratch their head on that one. Jim says, are you a closet Tory or something? And you see, that's where Reform win over. On that very last point is the most interesting part of Jim's otherwise slightly skew-if point. Are you a closet? So if you find disagreement, this is how Trump has kind of got to where he's got. You notice that when somebody would say, I don't trust Trump, I don't like Trump, I think he's distasteful, I think he's possibly criminal, and I think he's immoral. The first answer that comes back from a Trump fan, oh, you're a Biden fan, are you? I don't know how someone extrapolates that from just not happening to like one person. Well, you might be a DeSantis fan. You might be a supporter of any one of the candidates that stood to be the Republican candidate for the United States. I don't know why people kind of automatically assume, therefore... It used to happen with the Tories, didn't it? Don't like Boris Johnson. Oh, you're a Corbyn fan, are you? No, I'm a Thatcherite, mate. But hey, that is the kind of weird world we live in. Dallas says, I recently became eligible to vote in Shropshire. Provided there's a Reform candidate, they'll definitely have my vote because it's a party of sound common sense. There it is right there. I foresee wokeism being dead and buried if they came to power. No more pandering to mad minorities. It's the common sense point that absolutely rings true. Let's talk about this and a few of the other big stories that are out there as well today. Robert Taylor back with us, political commentator. Afternoon to you, Robert. Happy Christmas and all the rest of it.
Good afternoon, Ian. Merry Christmas to you.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, either way, whatever way you slice this one, it's, you know, for students of politics, this is a very interesting story that a party that's been on the scene for about 20 minutes is even, let's underplay it a little bit, even level pegging with the Tories is quite something.
It's amazing, really, where you think Reform have gone just in the last year, and they were already creating waves before the last year. But if there's one party that has really come on strong in the last few months, particularly since the election, it is Reform. And what we've seen is Labour's gone off a cliff. The Tories haven't really benefited. It's Reform that has benefited from the collapse in popularity of the Labour Party.
Yeah. I mean, what's the way around this? I mean, Kemi Badenoch at the moment, and it's early days, doesn't seem to be knocking seven bells out of Keir Starmer at the dispatch box. I know that, you know, announcements will come, the political terrain sort of changes as we go through the years, etc., and maybe she'll have her moment. But bearing in mind, she's up against Nigel Farage, who, love him or hate him, is one of the most attractive speakers out there. Doesn't matter whether you are with him in what he says. Kemi Badenoch isn't that person, although she can be quite effective. As we know, when she was business secretary, she was very good in the House of Commons. But, I mean, that's the reality, isn't it? Kemi versus Nigel.
Yeah, he is. Nigel is probably the most consequential politician, I would say, since Tony Blair, which is all the more remarkable when you consider he's not been in Parliament for nearly all of that time. He's not not in one of the two major parties, but he still had this enormous impact on the direction of this country. And you can say that without agreeing or disagreeing fundamentally with where Farage is coming from. But all of us would have to admit he's a formidable campaigner. So you've got Kemi Badenoch, who's she's doing well. I supported her, but she's doing okay. But she needs to do so much better than okay when she's got the incumbent Prime Minister to her left, and then she's got Farage, who you could say is on her right. So she's fighting a war on two flanks.
Can she win it?
At this stage, I really doubt it, but I also doubt whether Farage and Reform can win it in the sense of becoming the next government. And, OK, we're looking forward 4.5 years. I think the big danger is that Keir Starmer might get back in on the basis of only a third of the vote again, because the right is completely split down the middle. And I think right now that's probably the most likely scenario.
Yeah, I've spoken to dozens, probably, well, hundreds over the years, but sort of in recent times, dozens of, very astute political commentators like yourself, etc., Robert, and others that have, very good at crunching those numbers of what it might look like. And digging deep into it, it seems that at the moment, if there were to be another general election, Reform might find themselves doing a bit of a kind of Ed Davey in getting 30 or 40 seats. They're not going to win it. They won't get near to that, but they will further dent the Conservatives and further enhance Keir Starmer. And, as you rightly say, stick him back into number 10.
Yeah, so in other words, Farage is Starmer's best mate in those terms, because it means that the most disappointing Prime Minister in my lifetime, I just about include Liz Truss in that, the most disappointing Prime Minister in my lifetime might actually get back in again. And of course, caveat, we're talking many years ahead. But just at the moment, I can't see that 24% of Reform voters going anywhere else but sticking with Reform. That's where they're going. Can the Tories really go under around where they are now? They're at rock bottom. So those two are going to be slugging it out. And what I think is most likely to happen is they'll continue to slug it out for the next 4.5 years and knock each other out rather than Keir Starmer.
Yeah, and it's about speaking language, isn't it? A couple of mates of mine, one, very working class guy, but now found himself in a fairly senior position, working for a large banking organisation, absolutely a Reform voter. The guy that fitted my radiators, working class guy, a Reform voter. And it's all about that sense of a party that sort of sounds as if it's just simply preaching common sense. It's almost as simple as that.
And they really do their PR well. I mean, this story today about more members than the Tories, you can't accuse Reform of underplaying that story. And of course, Kemi, rightly or wrongly, she took the bait, and I think she's come out the loser from that little PR battle today. It all helps Farage. He's the master of communication.
Absolutely. Well, the other thing that might happen, of course, is that Labour turn out to be even worse than they are, and currently they are even worse than we thought they were going to be. It's not a great start. I know the kind of sort of catch-all phrase seems to be, well, they're getting the bad stuff out the way first. I don't think they were that considered when they thought about what they were doing. So we could have some real difficult times to come. The economy is not in good shape, but again, it's happening at the beginning of their time in office. I do sense, and this brings us to our next story, tax increases. Experts warning Rachel Reeves she may have to break her pledge not to raise taxes. There's clearly going to be some pretty ugly fiscal decisions happen in the next 12 months. The economy, even if it started to grow a bit, it's only going to grow a bit. We ain't turning any big corners anytime soon. We know that it's stagnated. Inflation is still on the rise. It's not a good place to be, and I don't know how she's going to address this without coming back to rob someone of their hard-earned money in the form of taxation.
Well, absolutely bang on with everything there, Ian. What happened to that pledge to be the fastest growing nation in the G7? Well, that's one of many promises, pledges, even just targets that seem to have been dropped. particularly after that catastrophic budget from Rachel Reeves. And it looks as though we might be heading for Rachel's recession. They all talked about Rishi's recession a year ago. Well, if you use that kind of language, it's going to come back and haunt you. So Rachel's recession, I'm afraid it will have to be labelled that if it occurs next year.
Let's look at Mr Starmer then. Since taking office, he seems to have made a disproportionate amount of play in the rebuilding the UK-EU relationship thing. Now, I know some of this was probably on Rishi Sunak's list as well, but and bearing in mind the amount of air miles he's clocked up, I think he won an award for the most air miles of anybody on the planet since he's in the last four or 5 months. But there is a sense that Starmer is maybe going somewhere here that isn't necessarily what people would have voted for when it came to Brexit.
Well, we have to remember that it's only a few years since Keir Starmer pretty much led the campaign to overturn Brexit. He's been pictured with the flag of the EU. He's an EU man to his core. He never wanted to leave. But of course, come the election in the summer, he said, well, Brexit is safe with me. Well, do we believe him? Now, he would say, Ian, that what he's looking for is sensible cooperation with the EU on things like science and security and data roaming. But I ask the question, can we trust Brexit with Keir Starmer?
Yeah.
Given where he's been in the past, given where we know his sentiments really are with the EU, and given his history of flip-flopping, I hate to say it, Ian, but I don't think we can trust Keir Starmer.
Well, there's things like the Erasmus programme, which, of course, is the student exchange thing, if you want to look at it that way, where the under-30s can mooch around the EU unhindered, they can work. We can go, or our under-30s can go over there, they can come over here. Again, you know, there's no denying it that it was something the Conservatives have floated and might also have done, we don't know, but certainly I can see that one coming round the corner at 100 miles an hour. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I don't think it's what people voted for. Free movement was part of the deal with the EU, and it's what the British people voted against in 2016. And the other things that we know the EU want as part of their negotiating strategy is control over our fisheries, which is a huge deal for certain parts of our country, and what's called dynamic alignment with EU food and agricultural law, which makes it so much more difficult for Britain to strike trade deals around the world on its own. So that's what the EU want. They want to basically keep Britain within its sort of orbit, and we're hoping that Keir Starmer doesn't give any ground on those areas at all. Those of us who voted for Brexit. But can we trust Keir Starmer? That's the question.
I was just going to say, Rob, what is it with the EU? I mean, the sort of it's like a religion over there, particularly sort of driven by France and Germany. This idea that, you know, we could have an agreement to do this, but in order to get that agreement, you've got to sign up to these kind of very rigid, inescapable set of policies, sign on the dotted line, otherwise... What is that? Where does that thinking come from? OK, let's say under 30s, you're allowed to travel around all the 28, 29 countries, and you can do that unimpeded, and you can work, you can live, you can do all of that. We can go there, they can come here. But why the other stuff that has to go with that?
Because many people in Europe believe in the end game of the United States of Europe. That's what they want to achieve. Ever closer union. That's the whole mantra of the European Union, and it's something that Britain has always felt uncomfortable with. You could be a fervent Remainer and still feel uncomfortable about that end game of the United States of Europe. But that's what they want the EU to be. Britain has always wanted just close trading cooperation, but we can't get that middle ground.
Which it used to be, of course. That's how it all began, with the common market. And let's move to this story. Every government that's come in, and you'll know this well, Robert, they love that phrase, we're going to have a bonfire of the quangos. We want to get rid of all the waste. There's all these groups and committees and various councils that sit around debating. Some are paid very impressive salaries to sit on these meet once a week powwows where they discuss policy in certain specific areas. And every government says, Yeah, when we get in, we're going to get rid of all. We cut all the red tape, get rid of all the wastage. We don't. I remember Eric Pickles coming into my studio, evangelical about cutting the quangos. And of course, what tends to happen is a new government comes in. They do get rid of the quangos, hooray! But then they just get a load more with their friends on it rather than the previous lot's friends. Nothing's changed since Labour took office. There's 25 new ones. We've got one a week, basically.
Yeah, and the weird thing about these quangos is they're pretty shadowy. I mean, just today I was trying to do some research into a comprehensive list of all these quangos. It's really difficult to find.
Yeah.
Apparently there are about 300 of them. But you can't find a comprehensive list for love nor money, nor can you find how much money right now we as taxpayers are spending on these quangos.
Yep.
The latest figure I saw was £265 billion a year, and that's from 3 years ago. I imagine it's a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Now, what I would say, Ian, is some of these quangos have to be there. For example, NHS England, Network Rail, the DVLA, the things that these quangos do have to be done by government. So we can't just get rid of them all, but we need more detail.
What do we do? And I thought the point that Richard Holden, the former Tory party chairman, made was that many of these quangos simply duplicate existing public sector positions anyway. So why do you need a kind of almost another body, another layer of bureaucracy on top of what already exists? I mean, departments are paid handsomely and budgeted accordingly to look after most of this stuff.
And cynics would say it's about ensuring that ministers don't have to take tough decisions, but they can outsource those decisions to Great British Energy or whatever the Ed Miliband latest quango is called, and therefore they don't have to take the blame themselves, which is fundamentally a very undemocratic approach.
Indeed. Robert, on that point, have a cracking new year. Thank you for being with us. He's Robert Taylor, the journalist and commentator. Thank you to him. Over to you. Comments on anything you've heard so far. We're up for all of that, plus the trigger question that we're throwing out this afternoon. Which reform UK policy appeals to you the most? If you had to just put immigration aside, because they speak a lot on that, what are the other areas that you think are appealing? Chris makes a very good point. Smaller government, leaving the ECHR and add core to our own laws. More money in our pockets, the rise of tax relief, make work pay, tax foreign homes and property purchase, etc. All the stuff that, and if they carried all that through, you'd go, yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, Trump has got all of this to come. His policy on immigration, you know, you'd be forgiven for thinking that he's about to expel anyone that hopped over the Mexican border in the last 5 years. But that's been slightly, you know, anyone who's got criminal intent or criminal past might have to go. Could take about 80 years to do that. Will he make a difference? Last time, he didn't. He didn't expel or deport as many people as Obama did in his administration. So which way does it slice and how quick can they get this stuff done? It all sounds like common sense. Why do you love a bit of Reform UK? 0344 499 1000.
demonstrating its do what I say, not as I do attitude. I mean, just to boil, they are hypocrites and they are a blight on society, aren't they?
I mean, look, if I was doing Just Stop Oil's PR, which is not a job I would ever do, but if I was, I would say, do you think that maybe you should source those T-shirts from such absolutely watertight, ethical places that no one could ever dream of putting you on the front page of the Express to complain about this? That's the first thing I'd say to them.
So they're not very bright, are they?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
I guess the question could have been, are you Team Kemi or Team Nigel? Because ultimately, that's quite literally, I'd never really thought of it in such personalised terms as that, but that's come the next election, that will be the offer on the table for those who are centre-right. Do I want Kemi Badenoch or do I want Nigel Farage? Based on what we know at the moment, and politics is very much about a feeling, a sense. Sometimes we can get that sense wrong. Sometimes we can regret going with what we thought was a sound instinct. But other times it'll be bang on. And if you look at the state of play right now, it's a no-brainer. I mean, the Tories will be utterly destroyed. Based on where we are right now, at 26 minutes after 2, end of December 2024, the Tories will be toast. Let's go to your calls. Laura Jane in Hampshire. What are you thinking, Laura Jane? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. At one point, somebody was saying that they were not sure that we were getting organised to have our branch meetings to choose, and would we be choosing the MP?
Yep.
Well, our first branch meeting for Romsey and Southampton North is on the 21st of January at 7 p.m. And a friend of mine from Romsey and I are going. It happens to be in the local village near to where I live. And Paul,
you haven't said which. This is for the Socialist Workers' Party, is it?
No, it's not the Socialist Workers' Party. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I thought it was a given. Everyone.
No, I know. I'm teasing. So this is something, of course, that Reform have worked on, isn't it? To get local branch level.
Well, they are, and
areas.
I was quite surprised to get my email just before Christmas saying, come along, and obviously I'm going along. I'm in the older age bracket. Well, I'm 64. My friend is similar. My 3 grown-up children all voted Reform at the election, which I found quite interesting, but they aren't members of Reform as yet, anyway. But the age, it's interesting that, yes, the age range seems to be very split. There are a lot of young people joining, and I'll be very interested to see at the branch meeting what the age range is. But also, you're asking what's my favourite policy.
Yeah.
It's not really, for me, it's not a... Yes, for the Socialist Workers' Party, the Reform Party, I'm actually voting... I'm supporting them.
Can you hear us okay, Laura Jane?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, I think what I'm saying is that the party for me is about the fact that it's a new party, and the 2 other parties have nothing to offer me anymore. Not really about what they're offering, it's who they are and what they stand for has just gone.
Yeah.
And there's no way that I would vote for either of them. And I feel that Reform, it's about cleaning up the democracy and really looking to the future. And I feel that that's what they have. And yes, their policies aren't absolutely clear yet. It's a new party, but that's what it's about, supporting a new party, helping them, by giving suggestions at the local level, and, that rubbing off to the future.
There it is, Laura Jane. Thank you for that. And you know what? You've only got to look at who they've surrounded themselves with. with the chairman of Reform, a very experienced businessman who will put a lot of things into place to make sure that areas dovetail where they should do, that all the ducks are not just firmly in a row, but pristine and looking good as well. You've got a new treasurer in Mr. Candy, who is, I mean, you want to talk about an experienced businessman, absolutely crucial to the wider plan of Reform. So it's theirs to lose, really. I don't think they're about to win a general election in 2029, but you know what? I mean, yeah, most of the commentators talking about a 40 or 50 seat return, which will be game-changing and probably game-changing for the rest of time, or the rest of the next few decades, perhaps. But that would still be massive. And the big significance of that, of course, is that a huge chunk will come from the Conservatives again. So the Conservatives could come back with, you know, a very, I mean, I don't even know which superlative would fit in this, because it would be, it's already looking like a funeral. This wouldn't be so much a wake. I don't know what it would be. It would be the end, that's for sure. And the Tories sort of relegated to a kind of Lib Demi status. But then Reform UK might only be in the... You might find they've got sort of 50 seats each. But Labour have come back. I think a lot of those Labour supporters will go elsewhere, by the way, some of the red wall ones. I don't know who went or why people went Labour in such numbers. I know the share of the vote wasn't fantastic, but the upshot for Keir Starmer is he's got a flipping landslide, and that's all he needed, really, so he can put policy through. He's there arguably at least for a decade. Just let that settle for a moment. 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk open prisons as well in a moment. There's an interesting story and a suggestion that a former Tory Justice Secretary has said that open prisons could be the answer to prison overcrowding, the use or the greater use of them. More on that coming in a few moments' time. It's 2:30. This is Talk.
DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is talk. It's just gone 2:30. Let's have a look at this story then. Interesting times over there in the prison debate. A senior government advisor has said that Britain should move thousands of inmates into low-security open prisons to tackle the overcrowding crisis and reduce offending or reoffending. David Gauke, the former Justice Secretary, urged ministers to copy Spain, where a much greater proportion of convicted criminals are free to work and study outside prison walls during the day. Let's talk to the president of the Prison Governors Association, Tom Wheatley. Afternoon to you, Tom, and happy Christmas, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Nice to have you with us. Look, I mean, any idea is always worth having a look at. I mean, how does this one sound to you? Open prisons are obviously a very different category of prison to, you know, some of the others where people will be serving their time. How would this work, or could it even work?
So it could work. I think it's worth spending a bit of time describing what open prisons actually are, so that people are really clear. Open prisons are literally just that. They are open. There is no fence. There's no, there's no discernible perimeter to them. So you can literally just walk out of them. They are staffed at a much lower level than the majority of closed prisons. So supervision within an open prison is much lighter. It's much more light touch, and it relies on a good amount of trust between the prisoners and the staff in enabling them to operate effectively. And the majority of people, rather than working within the prison, will go out to jobs, unpaid work sometimes, jobs in charity shops, jobs in with employers that they can continue to work in after release. So they have been part of the British prison system for a very long time. They're effective, they work very well, but that there's a balance in there, and that balance is around risk and risk assessment. So at the moment, people that are in open prisons, the majority of people in open prisons go through a rigorous risk assessment process where prison governors and their staff around the country look at the likelihood of that particular individual complying with the regime in the open prison, the likelihood that they're going to stay there, the likelihood that they're going to behave in the right way, the likelihood that they're going to focus on the things that they can do to help them lead a law-abiding life after custody. Very recently, following the early release of some prisoners, we've expanded a scheme called temporary presumptive recategorisation, which means that more people without that kind of individual risk assessment process are moving into the open prison estate. And that's simply because we don't have enough space in the closed prison estate, and the early release schemes released a disproportionate amount of people from open prisons. That's who was captured in that early release scheme. So it's created space there, and we're now starting to move people into open prisons who wouldn't have been there previously. Some governors are worried, governors in open prisons are worried about their ability to run the kind of regimes they've been running and create the kind of culture that they've had there, where open prison feels earned. It feels like you've earned it to get there. So there's a bit of concern about that. And some governors in closed prisons are equally worried because they're sending all their most trustworthy prisoners into the open estate, yet some of them run excellent peer mentoring schemes for prisoners. They work in trusted jobs in closed prisons. And if you simply move all of those people into the open estate, it can become difficult to manage closed prisons. So there's a few factors around.
Yeah, I was going to say, the headlines will terrify some people, thinking that, you know, Bob the serial killer is going to end up having a mooch around their local town. I'm assuming that even the most, inept administrator would not let that happen. You'd like to think.
Well, the risk assessment process, so that there are people in open prisons who've been convicted of murder, but they've been in prison a very long time.
Yeah, they've usually come to the end of the sentence,
Yeah, they're at the point in their sentence where we're considering releasing them. So, the parole board might direct for a life sentence prisoner that they can move into open conditions as part of that managed risk assessed release process.
Sure. So when we talk about prison overcrowding, are we usually not including open prisons in that? Is there a whole wing available in most of these places that you wouldn't get in a Strangeways or a Wormwood Scrubs?
Yeah, so what's really happened, as prison capacity has run out over the past year, that has included the space in open prisons. So the various schemes that have been put in place to try and ease that pressure have resulted in lots of the lower risk prisoners that we had being released early. And that's had a knock-on effect into the open prison estate, because lots of those prisoners were already in an open prison, and those that weren't were potentially in a pipeline of prisoners who may have moved into open condition, but they've been released, so they're no longer there. So although the prison population, currently there's over 2,000 spaces in prisons in England and Wales, a disproportionate amount of those will be in open prisons.
Yeah. Does it make sense on the face of it, do you sense, Tom, when David Gauke says that it will help reduce overcrowding but also reduce reoffending? Is that certainly the latter point I think is quite interesting?
So there is something about that period of reintegration, about people in open prisons, prisoners in open prisons leave to go to work, and they do a proper full-time employed job out in the community and come back to prison at the end of the day, and they're held in prison overnight, held in prison at the weekend. Monday morning comes around, they go back to work again. And if that job is either a job that they can continue to do after they've been released, or it's part of learning again how how your work life works, how what it's like to go to work every day, then that is part of your resettlement, and it's one of the things that makes the risk of you reoffending in the future less likely. So there is a point to it. It does work, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
Because you've got to be ready for it, and you've got to be, your mindset has perhaps got to have changed, where you're thinking about the future and you're thinking about a future free of crime.
You've got a lot of experience in this area. I mean, you must have looked many times down various wings and at prisons and thought, there's certain groups shouldn't even be in this place. I mean, that thought must have crossed your mind many times. Who are those people that shouldn't be there? Are there areas where we need to just look at something else?
So some European jurisdictions have done different things in regard to people whose criminality is driven by substance misuse. It's driven by addiction. And they've opted for different routes, a sort of a healthcare route, to deal with the addiction problem that then stops people committing crimes. So that's about people not coming into prison in the first place. Ensuring that people are able to be employed, that they have a place to live, that they are part of communities. And by that, I mean that not only are they doing their bit for their community, but their community is looking out for them. All of those things make it less likely that people are going to offend in the first place. What we've done over the course of my 30 years working in prisons is we've become addicted almost to sending people to prison for longer. So the average length of stay in a prison for people convicted of a specific crime over the course of the last 30 years has gone up considerably. So people are spending a greater length of time in prison. A lot of that's driven by a sense that prison is easy, and punishing people, increasing the amount of punishment, makes it less likely that other people are going to offend. But there isn't there isn't sort of research and data and evidence to support that view. The majority of people that I speak to about why they find themselves in prison, particularly those that are convicted of really serious offences, violent offences, they weren't thinking about whether this would cost them 5 years in prison or 10 years in prison. That wasn't in their head at the point they committed the offence. So the deterrent effect of prison isn't perhaps as significant as we might think. All of these things have had an effect on the prison population. What we probably need to do now is reset and work out, based on evidence, based on data, what's the best thing that we can do to stop people reoffending, to have some sort of deterrent effect, because society is right. People have got to be punished if they transgress. So those things have got to be in place. But we've got to know what works and what is the most cost-effective way of dealing with this problem. Otherwise, what you get into is where we've been, which is you build more and more prisons, which are very expensive, and a prison place is about £50,000 per person per year.
Yeah.
It's huge amounts of public money. We need to spend that public money in the best way we can, and that best way is determined by the evidence available.
Just briefly, Tom, if you would, the overarching point which you've alluded to there, do you sense this whole story of overcrowding and reoffending, but overcrowding primarily, is that going to get worse before it gets better?
So I think the sentencing review will report at some point in the future, but that won't deal with people who are already in custody. And as I said, people have been sent to custody for longer. That might start to divert people or send them to prison for less time. It might do something different because we really don't know what the outcome of that is yet. So, in the meantime, we are going to see a growing prison population. We are still building new prison places. And that doesn't deal with overcrowding because the prison estate is overcrowded already and will be overcrowded. What it does is it just gives us perhaps enough capacity to deal with the people that are going to go before the courts, before the sentencing review changes the outcome at court.
Tom, great to chat. Thank you. Have a happy new year. Tom Wheatley, President of the Prison Governors Association, with us here on Talk. Let's get some calls from you on crime rates in the UK. This is Ben in Guildford. What do you got for us, Ben? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon to you too. I agree with a lot of what your last guest said, but it kind of ties into what was being said about booze and addiction and alcohol. You know, the reason why addicts, we have so many reoffenders is we imprison addicts, and unless you get them off the addiction, they have no choice but to reoffend.
Sure.
And the one thing we've never done, and I've been following the NHS for about 10 years on this, we have never put a significant pile of money into trying to solve drug addiction. And we have so many people, or alcohol addiction.
Alcohol and drugs. And do you know what? I can see that getting worse. I can't give you a specific bit of data as to why, but there is a very real sense that the reliance and the dependence on alcohol and drugs is not going down anytime soon.
Well, the only reference I can give you since COVID, the people who are alcohol dependent or alcoholic has risen by 65%. And I don't know the drug statistic, but it'll be quite similar.
I would think so.
You know, I think we could save a lot of money just by investing in some decent rehab programs and some real decent therapists, and hopefully get some people help that they need. So, because I've been working addiction all my life. I've met many addicts who've gone on to lead brilliant lives and be pillars of their community.
Is the problem too big, though, Ben? Is that the trouble? Is this too vast? That, a bit like solving immigration and the problems surrounding that. That it's so big, it's so kind of layered. You've got alcohol addiction, you've got drug addiction, there are other forms of addiction as well. Gambling is another obvious one. So you've got all of this going on. Could anybody come up with a plan that's going to solve that unless you employ about 200,000 people to do it?
Oh, yes, quite easily. There's so much wastage in the government at the moment. They were coming up with a plan, and then everything got centred around identity politics and gender-affirming care in schools and things like that, and that took all the funding from that plan.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but there's a lot of wastage in government that when it's finally not being wasted, can be used to just provide people with a simple plan to get them off the drugs for the first time. If they decide to go back on it, there's not much we can do. But I guarantee if you don't get them off it and you don't get them out of the mindset of taking it, then they're likely to reoffend, and this will happen for another 50 years. We've done nothing about the addiction thing here in the UK.
There it is. Listen, Ben, thank you. I think you're probably spot on, and you're right that we've not done very much about it either. Let's go to... what I've got here? I've got Eric, I've got Norman. Where shall I go? Norman's here. Norman, how are you doing?
Very well, Ian. Thank you very much.
Good.
Happy New Year to you.
And you too.
I hope. You were talking about the attraction of reform. Well, the attraction of reform for people like me who have always voted Tory for years is that they're the only people with, to me, any common sense.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's that phrase, common sense. It sounds like a group of people that are saying stuff that we all think.
Yeah, but if you look at like forget the immigration thing, but I see I'm in favour of this raising the tax threshold. I know they can't get it to 20,000 in a year or whatever.
Yeah.
But we have a problem getting people back to work. Now, until you can find a way of getting them back to work.
Yeah. Well, Ian Duncan Smith.
Stop the benefits.
No, I get it. Ian, listen, Norman, you make a great point, and thank you. Ian Duncan Smith, of course, thought that was part of the grand plan of universal credit and all these sort of associated policies around it, and that. I mean, I think there's certain levels of success around it, but I don't think it's solved the wider issue that we have of people who are just either never had a job, or towns where, 50% of people are on some kind of benefit, sickness benefit. We've got addiction problems. And all of that just feeds into, it begets another addiction problem, because if there's a sense of hopelessness, what do I do? Well, it's easy to go out and get absolutely K-lied of an evening, or to, go looking for the Peruvian marching powder. That'll give me a sense of euphoria for a couple of hours. You can kind of see why that happens. Thank you to Norman. More from you in a few moments. This is Talk.
It's do what I say, not as I do attitude. I mean, just to boil, they are hypocrites and they are a blight on society, aren't they?
I mean, look, if I was doing Just Stop Oil's PR, which is not a job I would ever do, but if I was, I would say, do you think that maybe you should source those T-shirts from such absolutely watertight, ethical places that no one could ever dream of putting you on the front page of the Express to complain about this? That's the first thing I'd say to them.
So they're not very bright, are they?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It's just gone 10 to 3. By the way, we've got the voice of doom, of course. Are we on day 5 or 6 of this? I think this is a rollover. I think this is potentially the longest. Maybe it's day 5. Maybe it's been equalled for rollovers. But so far, nobody has been able to identify this voice. Remember, it's a mystery voice with a political vibe to it. Don't call in. There is no prize, but you can message if you want to have a crack. That's fine too. Here's the voice.
I believe that so strongly
Who is that? Any ideas? Here it is again.
I believe that so strongly.
87222 if you want to message in. If we get an answer, a correct answer, inside the next 10, 12 minutes, we will reveal all. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here's the voice again.
So strongly.
So that's an
I believe that so strongly.
There you go. That's the sort of rap remixed version. It's what's known as a Hearn remix in the industry. People have travelled far and wide to get that. But if you think you know, 87222, our lines are open on that. But don't call, there is no prize. Back to your calls. This is Larry in Rainford. On that issue of prisons, Larry, how are you doing?
I'm okay, except this horrible weather.
Oh, yeah. I don't mind. See, I don't want it damp. Damp weather is bad weather, right? Cold is good weather. Cold is fine. Send me out on a dog walk when it's -2 with my gloves and my scarf. I don't mind that. But going out this morning is foggy. It's damp, right?
Yeah, and affects your bones and your joints.
Your bones, your joints, and even a young buck like me gets that very sense of bone ache.
Yeah, well, we're not quite young, I don't think, Ian.
You're not wrong. Listen, what have you got for us, Larry?
Well, after 15 years plus as a magistrate, I've visited every prison in the Northwest, I think.
Yep.
The saddest two places that I've visited, number one was Style, the women's prison.
Oh, yeah. Didn't they make a documentary about that once? I'm sure they did.
Oh, I don't know. They didn't pay me any royalties or equity fees or anything.
You might not have known you were on it. What about that? What was your take then, from a magistrate's perspective, someone involved in that process? What did you make of people that shouldn't be there?
Well, I think the guidelines need totally reviewing for magistrates, which people can go to prison and which are unsuitable.
Yeah.
Having said that, a lot of the women seemed quite happy in Style. But they were still on drugs, and I think before they enter the prison gate, they should have had some therapy.
Yeah, maybe. Because drugs seems to be the big thread here, right? The common word that addiction comes up every single time we debate this.
It does. I mean, I've chatted to a few women and they were talking about leaving their children, how it was upsetting them, distressing them, and if it hadn't been for the odd fix, they wouldn't have been getting through the first sentence. And then I went into another room where there's a sewing class, shall we call it.
Yep.
And they were working for Do It All, who had them making the uniforms.
Okay.
They were doing very well, but some of them were still on drugs. We've got to get them some therapy before they get through the prison door.
Sure.
And the same thing happens both in Old Course and Walton prisons with the men. The men are hooked. They need detoxing before they get through the door.
Could we not, Larry, just to interject, this idea that you can get drugs in prison, which has been the case for years, is that not an area that could more easily... I know it's not the answer to people's addiction problems, but there must be a way to stop drugs getting into prisons.
Prisoners are very clever. They're not academic, but they're clever. I think it's too expensive to stop drugs going in, because that means that every prisoner has got to be watched 24/7.
But then, yeah, and I guess, I've often heard it said that, if you've got a wing of prisoners who are slightly off their face, that's sometimes preferable to the staff in terms of dealing with people en masse.
They're all, I don't mean the bonkers, they're all high as kites.
Wow.
And the actual atmosphere is no different in open prisons, because I've been to a couple on the northwest coast area and in Chorley, I think it is. And apart from the fact that a lot of the prisoners are younger in the open prisons in the northwest,
sure,
I do think that it's got to be something addressed on when they're accused of their crime. They should have somewhere where they can be taken for, say, a week, 7 days, and they're totally detoxed.
So the detox element is all crucial. Larry, we hit the clock, but thank you for that. Jules, don't go away. We will speak very shortly. That's Jules in Bedford, and thank you to Larry, former magistrate, who's been around the prison system quite a lot. Thank you to her. More comments from you on the way. 0344 499 1000. Will we get a winner for the Voice of Doom? There's the big question that everybody is asking. Have a listen again to the voice.
I believe that so strongly.
If you think you know who that is, 87222. Don't phone in, by the way, because there ain't no prize, is there? But you can join in if you fancy it. We will reveal the answer to the voice if we get a winner on the other side of the news at 3. We'll also be taking your calls as well. Variety of subjects, in particular that issue surrounding Reform UK. Big membership, it's on the increase, apparently beating the Tories now for members. Thoughts on that as well.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, Oivamo slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Welcome back, the home of common sense. Coming up this hour, we'll continue to take your calls and explore the interesting story of Nigel Farage declaring Reform UK now as the real opposition in British politics, claiming the party had overtaken the Conservatives in terms of membership. It certainly looks that way. The Tories are fighting back, saying this is nonsense. Nonsense, says Kemi. Thoughts on that, and specifically, what is it for you about Reform UK that is the prime attraction beyond their area where they lead the way on immigration? What else is it that takes you toward, gravitates you towards Reform UK? Also this afternoon, almost 1 in 5 workers will be employees of the state by the end of the decade as Labour's spending plans increase the size of the public sector. This is according to analysis from an economic think tank. If you wanted the best, the very best example of where a government has gone wrong, fundamentally and profoundly wrong, it's right there in that stat. Details on the way. And it's a Friday, which means Tech Roundup. Will Gart is back with us looking at the big tech stories of the week. Tech stories don't stop for Christmas, from children on social media to making sure you know how to wipe your phone's data so no one else can get hold of your innermost digital secrets. Stand by for all of that. Our lines are open. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. Now, before the news, it was the voice of doom. I think we're on day 5 of this, so it's been a bit of a rollover. Have a listen to the voice we've been playing you.
I believe that so strongly.
Who is that? It's a very simple question. These are some of the wrong answers. Cecil Parkinson, no. Tony Blair, no. Tim Lawrence, no. Tim Lawrence, the fellow that was married to Princess Anne, is that him? I think it might be. No. Michael Palin, no. Henry Bellingham, no. In fact, we still haven't got a right answer. It's a day 6 rollover, kids. That's more exciting than the lotto. Stand by. It's back tomorrow at about 2:45. We will get a right answer because no, it's not tomorrow. It's Saturday tomorrow, isn't it? Saturday. I might do it from home tomorrow. I might just do it on my own, just to test it out. Back next Thursday, so you've got a week to think about this, and then we'll see if we finally get a winner. Let's continue. Lots of stories to look at. It's been a busy one. Christmas is often a bit of a stinker of a time for news. There's nothing around. There's loads of things around at the moment. We're joined by James Mathieson, former Labour Party spokesperson. James, good afternoon to you and happy Christmas.
Good afternoon. Merry Christmas to you, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. Let's talk about, firstly, this ONS civil servants working from home issue. So this is the Office of National Statistics facing criticism for low office attendance, with some offices having less than 5% attendance at times, despite errors in key statistics this year. I don't even understand the sentence I've just read out there, frankly, but we've got too many people working from home, apparently.
Apparently. I have no issue with this. You probably won't be surprised to know that. Sat in my own house working today.
Indeed.
But you know, this is the nature of the workforce now. People are changing their lives, and it was on the cards anyway, but it was very much boosted by the pandemic and by people's experiences during what was a very dark time for many people, of course, on furlough, but on those who were able to work from home, working from home and seeing that they could live a different quality of life and a different kind of life. And people have asked themselves the questions as to, why do I need to be chained to a desk to be considered productive, when actually in a much more flexible kind of routine, especially people with children, people with families at home, I can get a lot more done and have a better quality of life as well, because at the end of the day, I think most of us work to live rather than live to work.
It's interesting you mentioned that you know, post-COVID. I was thinking the other day, I'm sure a bit of research would give me the answer to this. There's probably a company out there somewhere that's been doing this since 1978, and we've never heard about them. Just one lone organisation that says, we've been doing this forever, it works brilliantly. And of course, there are jobs where, you know, you're self-employed or you're freelance, where there will be perhaps more flexibility. But this isn't going away, is it? I mean, this is to stay, if you like. I mean, this is the new contemporary workplace.
It is. Crucially, it's about choice. And I think that's the thing. I think people kind of panic and think, oh, you know, everybody wants to be away from home, especially young people. They're lazy now. They want to be at home. They want to be doing less. There is nothing wrong with people want to do less for more. I mean, you know, the idea that we should take some kind of perverse pride in the fact that you've overworked yourself or you've been overworked by your employer when there's little to gain from doing so. The workplace market now is very much about moving between jobs. And I appreciate, you know, some of your viewers who probably put in 30, 40 years of work into one company or one workplace, you know, and were rewarded for their loyalty. It just doesn't work like that anymore. People are doing like a year, 2 years in a job, moving on to a different role, a different aspect of their career. So the workplace has changed dramatically, and this is just part of it now. I think part and parcel of what we see.
I wonder if there are unintended consequences of this that we won't see for a little while. I know, you know, there's some, I don't want to say romantic arguments, but there's some fairly compelling arguments about being part of a physical work for a team and having that camaraderie, having that face-to-faceness, having that kind of eye-to-eye contact that can never really be replicated. You can give it a go and you might end up with, you know, still good results and it hasn't affected the overall outcome of productivity. But something is lost in the mindset, the kind of human proclivity of wanting to share time with your fellow humanoids.
I'll be totally honest. When I first left Westminster in 2020 and ended up working in the charity sector and leading teams in public affairs and communications, I ran teams and had to manage teams of, you know, up to 7 people who were in different parts of the country completely because we were entirely remote as a workforce. And I was sceptical at first. I'm thinking, how am I going to build a relationship and a rapport with people who I manage who are all over the place? And I can't possibly visit all of them. But through, you know, annual events, through, you know, quarterly events where everyone gets together and meets in the flesh and, you know, you can build those relationships. Sure. And people are happier. People are more positive when they have the flexibility and choice. So you find that the calls that you have, the contact you have with your employees is much better rather than, you know, that guy in the corner with the cough who keeps getting on your nerves, you know, because it's 8 o'clock in the morning, you don't want to hear him coughing. You know, all of that stuff that people have been subjected to being in an office is removed, and therefore you have a happier, more positive workplace. It doesn't work for everyone, but the key aspect is choice.
Let's move on to this story, James. Public sector employment is set to rise. Apparently by 2030, nearly 1 in 5 workers will be employed by the state. That's up 16% since 2018. This apparently is how the government spending plans works. So big numbers working for the state. That's a sign that something's gone wrong, isn't it? When the state has to employ itself to make the figures work.
I don't think they're employing people to make the figures work. I think this is the bounce back from years of austerity. You know, over the past 14 years, we saw in the austerity programme, especially early on from 2010 onwards, we saw huge cuts to public services because that's where the Conservatives decided that those cuts were going to fall. You know, that was austerity. Whereas now, although there are big finances to balance, Rachel Reeves has decided that other people will take the cuts and the burden will be shared out across various places that we've seen, you know, kind of pushback from in recent months. But of course, the public sector is not the target, so we're able to see it grow further and more. The idea is under a Labour government, of course, people will know this, but they like a strong state. I believe in a bigger state and that the state has a big role to play in people's lives. And it can only do that with better, bigger teams of people.
How does that work, though, James? Because I kind of, you know, I don't put my cross in any particular box at the moment in terms of politics because it's all over the place. And I've, like so many people watching and listening to this, I've lost quite a lot of trust in... Not necessarily I mean, there are some individuals that I would pass in the street, but there is a sense that something within the system feels wrong. But my core belief is still that the smaller you can get the state, the better life will be. It will be better economically, but more than that, it's a sign that, you know, you've freed people to do their own thing, that people are healthier to do their own thing. They are more productive to do their own. They're more inclined to do their own thing because they're living in a nice environment where you don't need a big state to do all of those big jobs. And that to me is a sign of success. A big state is a sign of failure, a bit like having a busy prison system.
I understand the thinking behind that, and like any ideology, it's admirable if we could see it come to fruition. But much like, Marxism or communism. I don't believe that we'll ever be in a position where things are good enough or happy enough, or that we can ignore human nature to a degree where that can actually be a reality or a plausible reality. For most people, the state should be there, and this is my opinion, always has been, should be there to help and support them. I was raised in a single-parent household. Without the support, intervention, and the benefits and the welfare benefits system, I wouldn't have gotten through finishing school. I wouldn't have been able to, kind of go on to the things that I want to do. I didn't go to university anyway because of the challenges, but seeing those opportunities afforded to my peers at the time who otherwise wouldn't have been able to take those opportunities.
But that's great. I 100% endorse that as well. That, and growing up,
you've got to have state involvement to do it. That's the thing.
Indeed, and growing up, not single parent family, but a very working class family with literally nothing. Then I'm aware of why a state is important, but it's important for those reasons. But in a digital world, you might think, bearing in mind we were just talking about working from home and, how things are automated these days, you might be forgiven for thinking, well, the state would surely, just by, if for no other reason, technologically get smaller.
Well, it's interesting because AI, and this is a big question that the Department for Science, Innovation, Technology is having at the moment, is they're looking at how they can apply AI into different parts of the government, because likewise the AI sector as a business side of things is very profitable for Britain. We've got some great minds here, we've got great companies doing great things, but at the same time it's got huge benefits in application for government. Think about the planning system that Labour's wanting to reform and things AI could do in that. Think about the way that you can automate certain services that otherwise haven't been able to be automated. So you're right, I think in the long run we will see not a shrinking of the state, but a more efficient and well-oiled machine, which is what we should have and what taxpayers should expect for their money.
Yeah, I mean, if AI does what some people are suggesting, there won't be anybody working anywhere.
Well, I think I'm sceptical about the I mean, you and I, at the end of the day, you can sit it down and you could tell it, you could program it, all of our opinions, everything we've ever said. You could give it a script of everything Ian Collins has ever said, but it won't be the real deal, will it?
It won't be the real deal. It's whether people care whether it's the real deal, I suppose. Final one, which again, there is a sort of synergy between all of these stories. New Quangos. I said this to our previous guest. You'll be aware of this as well, James. Every time a government comes in, they talk about a bonfire of the Quangos. Let's get rid of. There's too much red tape. There's too much nonsense. Let's get rid of them. What tends to happen, the Tories do this with a PhD level as well. Get rid of those Quangos. So we don't want those stinky Quangos. Get out the town, you horrible Quangos. We'll just start some new Quangos with some people that we know on them, and we'll give them different names slightly, and you end up with pretty much the same thing. And we're now learning that there's a Quango a week forming under this Labour government.
There is quite interesting language from the press. I mean, I'm reading some of the cuttings here from the Express and from the Mail, and the way that they've worded it is there's one every week set up. I mean, there's been a huge amount of them set up in a space of a month. Of course, all they've done is average them out across the time frame of the government to say it's one a week. I mean, it equates to that, but it's not. What's happening is there's been a huge new set of these organisations, these Quangos as they get called, put into place to manage and oversee the various changes that Labour want to make. And you're right, look, every time a new government comes in, new people who are associated with it, who need to be connected to the party, who they need to show that they're ideologically on side with them or they're loyal and all the rest of it. And it can look like a colossal waste of money and time. But ultimately, if we want a government to do what it's been elected to do in its manifesto promises, then it has to be able to have control and oversight over those functions. And these seem to be the most efficient way to do that.
Well, Richard Holden, the former party chairman, made not an unreasonable point where he said, look, some of these Quangos, and I think he would probably say this has been the case under the previous administration, some of them appear to sort of duplicate existing public sector work, and that's where the problem is. I mean, we're already paying people some impressive salaries to do public sector work. Why do we need another group of people on top of that to replicate what those guys are meant to be doing anyway?
Exactly, yeah. It's about control. It always has been. It's about trying for the government to try and keep its control of these organisations, because imagine, these civil service, as we know, runs deep and is politically neutral, or supposedly politically neutral.
Yep.
But we see that, people who were in those jobs for 20, 30 years and several different governments come in, they've got their own idea of how things should run. So the quickest way for a government often to try and steer the ship and change direction is to create a new organisation above that. And look, when I'm talking about reducing or building the efficiency of the state, this is not the kind of thing I'm talking about, because this is the kind of thing that annoys people, I think, as you rightly say. It looks like a waste of taxpayers' money, but at the moment in our system, which overall is very inefficient, it's the way to try and drive change, unfortunately.
James, thank you. Always great to gauge your views. Have a great new year as well, by the way. James Mathewson, he's a former Labour Party spokesman. We won't be surprised to hear some of what he had to say there. One of the problems, I think, with quangos and the civil service is the lifers, those that have worked forever in this institution where groupthink reigns supreme, where they cannot think outside the parochial box of statist ideology. So you're stuck within it, no matter which government come in, you're there all the time. Telling somebody who's worked for 30 years in the civil service, or somebody who's done that for 3 decades, coming up with we need a quango. That's how they got. They've never thought they've never had to think, literally had to think outside the box. Starting up a quango that's going to cost another couple of $100,000. As far as they're concerned, that's what you do, isn't it? That's how it works. Because they've never had experience elsewhere to wonder whether it might work without having to do that. Let's go to Jules in Bedford. Back to that issue of reform and those policies that enamour you to vote for them on this occasion. Jules, what do you think? Hi.
Ian, hi. Happy Christmas and Happy New Year and all that sort of
And
stuff.
you too.
Yeah. So the policy, really, I think that they're the only people who deliver is scrapping net zero.
Yep.
And the reason why that matters to me is that the people behind the Labour administration, the sort of policy wonks, the think tankers, the quango drivers, they all believe in not just net zero, but what you need to get net zero, which is a lack of growth and preferably degrowth. Yeah. Growth, of course, is the ultimate fuel for the capitalist engine that they despise. And you just go back to George Monbiot, who's been raving about these things for 10 years, and he's actually promoting degrowth, and all his acolytes buy into degrowth. It's no accident that the economy's tanking. It's exactly what the machine wants and knows actually needs to happen if we're going to get to net zero. So I scrap that.
So they're quite relaxed there. Monbiot doesn't have any heating in his house. Did you know that, by the way? He apparently has. He's a self, whatever the word is for someone with no heating, because he's managed to make it so efficient, apparently, that he doesn't need it. But why would he want no growth, though?
Because it's growth that requires... to achieve net zero, you have to be prepared to have less in many, many areas. So less flights, less cars, less clothing, just less. And you can't get to that unless you're prepared to accept going backwards.
Which ties in with our other story of the state getting bigger, because the state's going to have to manage all of this. More people won't be working if we follow that to its natural conclusion. So we'll need more people running the place.
Yes, exactly. And that
we don't, but they think we do.
No, yeah, that's what they think. And of course, on the back of this, you also have delights such as carbon allocation and monitoring, or also known as rationing. That's going to be one of the things they're going to have to bring in.
I love a bit of carbon. Who doesn't like carbon allocation? Come on, Jules.
It's the restriction I'm more worried about.
Well, indeed, you're absolutely right. I mean, we joke about this stuff. I was telling somebody this over Christmas. We talked about it on air just before Christmas as well, that, there may well be a time when you go to the supermarket and try and buy a chicken, and someone says, I'm sorry, you've had your meat quota this month already.
Yes, exactly.
You can't buy any more chicken, and you certainly can't fill your car up with petrol when you leave the supermarket, because you've had your petrol allowance as well.
Yep, that's exactly where we're heading. And I don't blame the ordinary civil servants, because, of course, net zero is literally the law, OK? So you've got the activists who are pushing it, but until the law is scrapped, the Climate Change Act is scrapped, and all its bastard spawn of regulations, until that's gone, we make no progress. That's why Sunak couldn't frack, is because the law won't let him do it. Yeah. So this is why we need to scrap, and only reform will deliver that.
There it is, Jules. Thank you, Jules in Bedford. Passionate, very fluent stuff from Jules. Thank you to him. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. 22 minutes after 3. This is Talk.
demonstrating its do what I say, not as I do attitude. I mean, just to boil, they are hypocrites and they are a blight on society, aren't they?
I mean, look, if I was doing Just Stop Oil's PR, which is not a job I would ever do, but if I was, I would say, do you think that maybe you should source those T-shirts from such absolutely watertight, ethical places that no one could ever dream of putting you on the front page of the Express to complain about this? That's the first thing I'd say to them.
So they're not very bright, are they?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Let's go back to your calls and comments. Gary says, why is it that whenever prison is debated, it always seems to be from the point of view of what more we can do to help the offender than what more can be done to keep the rest of us safe from the offending? If you look at Poland and Singapore, they both have many more people in prison per head of population than the UK. Poland is pretty much the lowest crime rate in Europe, and Singapore has one of the lowest crime rates in the world. Do you think that might just be due to the fact that when criminals are locked away behind bars, they cannot commit crimes, and when they're locked up for longer, they think very carefully before reoffending once they come out? I don't mind paying more tax to build and run more prisons if it keeps offenders off the streets for longer. That's a cracking point. You'd think there was, nobody in jail in Singapore, which is a great example because they have such stringent rules and regulations about things, anything from, dropping litter, chewing gum, vandalism, the stuff that's called minor crime. They properly knuckle down on. So there's clearly, there must be still enough crime to get that amount of people in the jail, but if they're in there for a long period of time, then, clearly that has an effect. I know that is an argument, isn't it, that actually we don't lock people up for long enough, whereas those that agitate against the kind of current penal system say, no, that doesn't work at all. There's no evidence that works. Well, I think Gary's point about Singapore and Poland are pretty compelling. Ian over here in London. Ian, on reform, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
It's me again.
Welcome.
Welcome. No, basically, as far as I'm concerned, unless Reform and the Conservatives get together, they've got no chance of getting out what's in here at the moment. Because, quite simply, there's not enough. As much as you can say, yes, that, as you say, that Reform is, to a degree, one-trick pony. They've only got the immigration, that's it. They don't come out with any other sort of things at all. And the Conservatives have got, as much as you can say they've got 130,000 members, there's a lot more that won't go the full hog of what Reform are offering. So the two sides have got to get together. Now, it really then comes down to egos, whether Farage wants to just completely smash the Conservative Party, and whether Badenoch wants to do a deal with Farage.
I mean, that would, whether some Tories hate the idea and some Reform people hate the idea, if collectively they wanted to win the next election, that would almost 100% work.
Absolutely, because you can be sure, that otherwise, if unless they do something like that, you'll find some more of the Conservatives might go to the Liberal Democrat, which is absolutely a waste of time.
Yeah.
Right? But it's the only way they're going to get Starmer out, and that is it, because if they don't do that, he'll be there for 10 or 15 years because of the way that he's doing things. It's like with this whole, it is a joke.
Yeah.
The whole system, what he wants to do with the councils and taking it, I think it was on your show that they said in before the election, that he wants to get more of the people in the council, put all the power to the councils and take all the power away from Westminster So that Westminster, whoever gets in power, has got no hope of doing anything.
There it is.
I don't know if that-
No, that makes perfect sense. Listen, your phone line, by the way, probably not noticeable at your end, but our end has gone totally nuts and alien-like on us. But point taken, that's Ian from London. Thank you for that. And it ultimately, if you wanted to settle this Reform Conservative thing once and for all, you'd have to find a merging of both parties. Because that would, well, it wouldn't. For those that aren't happy with it, they would leave. There's many Tories, there's a lot of One Nation Tories that want nothing to do with this. There's a lot of Reform members that want nothing to do with the Tories. But ultimately, if, as a collective, they wanted to win, they probably could win as early as 2029 if they somehow merge. I think that sounds easier than it actually is. Kim says, this is one of my favourite quotations of all time. Ronald Reagan once said, this is reference to the conversation we had about the state getting bigger. The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are this: I'm from the government, I'm here to help. So true. I saw a clip of, over Christmas, of Ronald Reagan on Johnny Carson's show from, I don't know what year that would have been, mid-70s, I would say. And so before he became president. And I hadn't really done justice to just how switched on Reagan was and how he felt the pulse of the nation. And he wasn't a Donald Trump character. I think he was no stranger to a bedroom, but he was no Donald Trump character, but was able to still have, much like Thatcher, and of course their time in office chimed, but he was able to just speak just brilliantly, intelligently, and effortlessly about, you know, the problems facing America and how he saw it. And the only reason I mention this is because I'd kind of previously thought that he was a little bit of I thought he kind of lucked in. I remember in his latter years as president, I think the poor old boy was slightly losing it a bit. I don't say that unkindly. I think he genuinely was suffering. And wasn't able to recall facts and figures. But back then, he was talking a language people hadn't really heard before. An American having a pop at the American system and saying that the American system is wrong. It's going to cost you, it used to cost you this as a family to live and survive, and now it costs you this. Something's gone wrong. And he was just completely effortless in how he imparted some very hard facts and figures. It's worth looking up. And he looked the part as well. And it's just a lack of that we need. And I think the guy was sincere too. I think he believed everything he said, and I think he wanted to be there for the right reasons. And we don't always have politicians today who I think share those, what I would argue, are fairly compelling attributes. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. It's Talk, and Will Gart is going to join us next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
This comes from Ian, who says, do the Conservatives still have 131,000 members? You sign up for a year, so until people's memberships end, we don't know the real numbers. So those numbers would not take into account yet the people who have moved from Conservative to Reform. Well, I think it would count for Reform because they might have still moved, if you see what I mean. That they could be members of both parties. You can really, you sign up for a year. I guess that's true, isn't it? But the Tories did have... what was the figure? 180,000? No, 131 now, but prior to Rishi Sunak, or in the middle of Rishi Sunak's tenure, I think they were up to like 180,000 or something like that, and it went down gradually. It's a fair point from Ian. Thank you for that. Let's talk tech. Even though it's a Friday, even though it's between Christmas and New Year, it's still an exciting time, by the way. No one's at work, only us. And Will Guyatt, I wouldn't call this work, Will, would you?
No, I don't know. I've been keeping busy. Who really cares? This is a question, and I've not been listening for the last few hours. Apologies, I should have been, and I will be chastised for it afterwards. But who really gives a stuff how many members a political party has? Is it important?
Well, it's not. Bearing in mind Jeremy Corbyn had 500,000 members and didn't win an election, having a go twice, then it probably doesn't really replicate what's likely to happen at an election.
No, and Reform, last time I checked, Reform only has 5 MPs, right?
They got 5 MPs, but it is a fair point, though, Will, that Farage made, that, and maybe it's a headline, it's a seductive point, that the newest political party in the country has more members than the oldest political party in the world. I mean, there's something in that. If I was a Reform person, I would be shouting that stat from the rooftops.
But the trouble is now you've got all these people thinking, I'm going to show those mainstream media folk and those Conservatives a trick or two. I'm going to go and sign up and join up the good old Reform Party. I mean, I didn't even get a thank you from you for your Reform Party membership I got you for Christmas.
Well, I was waiting till now. Can I thank you for it? That's very kind, Will. It's brilliant. Apparently I might become the agriculture spokesman.
Just imagine. But there's been an interesting...
I'll put a tax on that lawn of yours for a start.
Yeah, it needs one. But the interesting tech story about this is Kemi Badenoch. Don't forget, Kemi Badenoch got in trouble for doing some hacking at one point or another in her career. She claimed she made some changes to her website, didn't get in a lot of trouble for it. But you're in a situation now where the Conservatives are claiming they think Reform have gerrymandered the number of votes ticking up on this page. And does it matter? I mean, from what I understand, and it's season of goodwill, so I'm not going to look negatively on anybody. What I believe has happened is initially, because I've done this previously for websites I've designed, the ticker was running of its own accord. However, at some stage, it was changed to refers to what's called an API, which is like an instruction on the internet. We don't know what it's pointing to, and we haven't got the data from the opposite side. It could now properly be linked to the number of people signing up for memberships, but it's quite an experience, Ian. I was listening to our colleagues on Times Radio earlier, and they were on air and they counted something like 50 memberships in 5 minutes at breakfast time. It seems very unusual that many people are signing up to a political party. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying that seems like a high number of people signing up to a political party on an early morning.
I did read somebody who'd clearly delved into the how these... You're right, the ticker isn't the authentic indication of members. You'd have to get into another part of the database. I can't remember the name it was given on this occasion. If you wanted to really... And only if you saw those numbers could you fully say. But I think, Reform's point and, Kemi Badenoch's point, they're having a bit of a row about it, and we can sit back with the popcorn, right? So...
Yeah, exactly. One thing Reform have done very well, if I'm here talking the season of goodwill, they do get and they do understand how to use social media. But let's not forget, Nigel Farage and the team behind Reform were obviously so instrumental in in some of the stuff around Cambridge Analytica back in pre-Brexit times. So they understand that. That is a group of people who get criticised as being Luddites and don't understand technology. They're probably the most tech-savvy party, or they've got the most tech-savvy advisors out there.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Whether people like the cut of the jib of that, but, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? They talk about social media being a kind of well, they used to talk about it being a swill of left-wing dirge. And in fact, it was probably Facebook that got Trump in 2016.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, it's been a complete sea change. X, whether you like it or hate it, I hate it now. It's become a right-wing playground, and
so it's gone what people saw the other way.
Yeah,
or has it? Because I still see lots of lefties on there as well as righties.
There is, if you look at the level of content and you look at the level of content that is being displayed to everybody, as in if you haven't opted in, as in what Elon Musk has chosen to show you, independent experts suggest that there is right-leaning content. And that, I'm not using right-wing in the negative sense. I'm talking about whether you are left or right.
Objectively, there is more
right-leaning content.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay. Let's move then. We'll stick with social media on this point. Children's social media crackdown. What's this story all about, Will?
Yeah, it looks like 2025 is going to be a really interesting year in terms of how law and tech finally come together. There's been threats of this for years, but just in the run-up to Christmas, we've had serving ministers saying that leaders of tech companies will get fined and will potentially get arrested in 2025 if they're not doing all they have to do under the Online Safety Act to protect young users. And that's a really interesting development, because under the Conservative government, we were all absolutely fascinated with trying to get Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg in front of parliamentary committees.
Yeah.
They've now gone back to the don't care about them. You've got a representative that looks after your company in Europe or in London, and if you're breaking the rules, we will drag the European or London boss to the table, because we've got ability to do that because you operate in this country. So we may find ourselves in a position, if tech companies continue to not come to the table and not work more closely with governments, you might find yourself where it's not just fines now. You could find some of these company bosses finding themselves in a weekend in Her Majesty's pleasure, His Majesty's pleasure, if this goes through.
I wonder if it will, because that's a battle that the Americans always argue from a very different perspective. They don't publish anything themselves, etc. They also, even if they did, they have amendments that protect quite a lot of what goes on. And of course there is a very sort of real robust thinking in the States from some that literally anything goes. And that's hard to argue if that's somebody's position. At least it's honest.
Exactly. It's a big change, though. We're going to see a big change in Europe and in Australia, in that we're getting to a stage now where governments have given the tech companies enough of a chance to come to the table and contribute. And the other thing we've also got, Ian, that's incredibly interesting as a result of this is that it looks like we're finally going to get to a position that you and I have mentioned many times over the years. Why not start taxing some of the profits of these social media companies to better protect young people and put all of the safeguarding in place in the UK? Put some taxes in for those companies making billions of pounds of profit, and you might actually do some good with the money.
Let's look at this story. UK Information Commissioner's Office warns that many adults don't know how to wipe their old devices, and many young people don't actually care about wiping their old devices. The latter point doesn't actually surprise me.
This is a really interesting thing, because like me, I know you occasionally change your mobile device, because we're fortunate enough to be in the world where sometimes we get to try new things and play around with new technology. So I find myself religiously in a process of whenever I finish with a phone, I will make sure that it's properly erased and deleted. Likewise with laptops or tablets or whatever devices I've got in the premises I'm testing for whatever purpose that week. But it does seem quite staggering that a growing number of us are just going, well, stuff it. And that means some people are just now sticking an old phone in the back of a cupboard and letting it gather dust and not be used. You could easily recycle, if you went through a 10-15 minute process of removing your stuff off the device, you could find yourself making a handsome couple of quid from one of the companies that you can sell your mobile device to, or an online auction service. So you can actually make a couple of £100 back on an old device after you've upgraded to something new. But lots of people are put off by that. Some of it is the complication of doing it. But if you've got a device and you're thinking, oh, I should remove everything off of it, just go to the internet, find a guide to erasing all information from, insert the name of your phone model here, and you'll find a guide which will take you through it in like 5 minutes or less. Might take 15-20 minutes to clear the device, but then all of your information is removed from it. Yeah, 100% you should do it.
Listen, look at this. I want to mention this, Will, because it's sort of in the kind of ballpark of the question of what we can erase or what we know about the inner workings of our machinery. Over Christmas, got our little boy a little kid's Alexa thing. So what he wants to do more than anything is just make announcements to us downstairs. And what I'd forgotten, and I think I've got this about right, is that when you have a new device, you are automatically re-signed up to the free music. Because I got the email, welcome to Amazon Music's Unlimited for the Family. And it's free for 30 days. And of course, you then have to unsubscribe so you're not charged. Two things happened. Number one, have you ever tried to find where the unsubscribe button is for Amazon Music? You can't do it on the app. You have to do it on a website.
You got to do it on a desktop. On a desktop. Website.
You go through it and you scroll, and there's lots of bits that look like they sound like it. When I finally got to where I was, I realised I was already signed up to the singular Amazon Music package, which is like £6 a month, and have been for 2 years. How did I not know this stuff?
Well, if you're playing those shawaddy-waddy and status quo hits all around your house...
What else do you play at Christmas?
I'm not surprised you didn't know, but it is... We do go into a situation here, it's the same with any tech company. It's damn easy to sign up to stuff, but it's really hard to cancel stuff. Now, Joe Biden had led some law and legislation in the US, which is going to make it much easier for US consumers to cancel. And it looks as though that's following into the EU. And I'm imagining that will probably then follow into the UK. And you'll be able to sort of more easily cancel this kind of stuff. The best thing I can say, though, to anybody, if you're still trying to set up kit that you got for Christmas for kids, etc., put the parental controls and the guidelines in now, because you won't be able to introduce it on the 4th of January when you've had enough of the child ignoring you or spending all of the money on your card to buy new games, etc. Yes. If you go through the process and set up all the parental controls now, definitely the best way forward.
There it is. More stories to come. Will Guyatt is with us right here on Talk. We are talking tech as we do on a Friday, just gone 3:45.
be honest, it all went over my head a little bit. But what Nigel Farage challenged Kemi Badenoch to say, invite one of the big four accountancy firms in, and they'll, certify our figures. Yeah. Will you certify yours? And I think that if this row is going to go on, let's have a real, independent evaluation of whether it's Reform or the Conservative Party or both.
What happened to that pledge to be the fastest growing nation in the G7? Well, that's one of many promises, pledges, even just targets that seem to have been dropped, particularly after that catastrophic budget from Rachel Reeves. And it looks...
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is 10 to 4. James Max will be here on Drive in around about 10 minutes' time, but he will nip in before then to give us the lowdown of what you can expect on a roller coaster of a programme with James from 4 o'clock. Will Guyot is still with us, Talk's tech correspondent. We're looking at the cost of new internet laws here. Will, what's the story?
Yeah, we're in a situation, and I mentioned this briefly before the break, that all of these internet laws and the Online Safety Act, the government are now going to start charging tech companies, and I think this is a really, really good step. The tech companies, I'm sure, will not think it's a good step, but the idea that these companies have made huge profits in the UK over the last decade or more, and it's time for them to pay something back, largely because they've got very, very, very efficient tax planning. Not illegal, but their tax, they do not pay tax. Some companies would, because of very efficient accountants. And if the government can take some money, or make some money, or generate some money to help put these laws into place via some kind of levy, I don't think it's a bad thing.
So we're talking companies like Meta, Google, Microsoft, Apple, TikTok, all of these kind of organisations that will have to pay, I think the figure that I saw quoted was £70 million annually to cover the cost of new internet laws. I mean, what do they mean by that, new internet laws, for a start? I mean, is this the online safety bill? Is it that sort of department?
Yeah, it's a lot of it's related to the online safety bill. So a lot of it is going to be the checks and balances that are put in place.
Shutting down free speech, basically.
No. And come on, because you've been sat on the opposite side of this, and you've told me how the internet companies and the social media companies run roughshod over society. I think you've even suggested, and I'm not directly quoting because I'm quite tired, but you've even suggested that people should be banned from social media up to the age of 25 before. Yes. That is something you have...
Slightly jokingly, I've now revised that to 47, by the way.
Yeah, but context is everything, but you have said that to me.
I do worry.
You're saying the Online Safety Act is going to stifle free speech in the UK. You cannot have it. Let me just finish. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot complain that there is no security or protection for users and then say, yeah, but this is going to stifle free speech in the UK.
You can.
What way do you want it? No, you can't.
You say you can't. Surely there is such a thing as making laws and rules and regulations. There are bars set, there's criteria. If you say, for example, right, you can't put fake news stories out about a new wonder drug, I would go, OK, that's fair enough. But if somebody comes along and muses that, well, there might be another way to solve this cold. Take echinacea oil. That might be a nice bit of herbal remedy advice. Yeah, is that going to get banned? Is that going to get banned, though?
Elon Musk posted on the 25th of December that he was the Ozempic Santa. So... for being in a position where you're supposed to have a responsible sense of...
Well, that's a joke, surely.
Yeah, but you're saying...
So he should not be allowed to say that?
He can say whatever he likes, and he will, because he's Elon Musk and he owns a particular platform. Yeah. But you cannot talk about free speech, because I cannot come on here and say exactly what I'm thinking in my mind right now, because it would get the station taken off air and everybody would lose their jobs. And that is no way to spend a Christmas period. However...
or any other period, for that matter.
Or any period at all. But I think we find ourselves in a tough situation where the people who criticise the tech companies and the power of the tech companies are now criticising the government for the Online Safety Act, which was their best effort at trying to put some checks and balances in places for the tech companies. I do think the Online Safety Act is very, very woolly in places, and hopefully it will be defined better over time. My concern is the overreach of power and the overreach of and the overinterpretation of laws to suit a government of the day's agenda. I do have genuine concerns about that, but I don't see how you can have the cake and eat it simultaneously if you want social media companies to be under deeper more control and
But Will, can you not see that there is a possibility that controversial comment or alternative versions of theories and ideologies could fall into that category?
Okay, let's start we've not got much time, but let's look at what's happened on X over the last few weeks with the drones in the US.
Yeah.
If you look at X, you'd think that an alien race are trying to stop a nuclear war on the UK and the world based on the rubbish that they are saying on the platform.
Yeah.
The trouble with X now is it's an engagement platform, and you get paid for engagement if you're somebody with a blue tick. Lots of people are now gaming that. That's not being stopped. That's not being cracked down. That absolutely should be stopped and be cracked down. But at the same time, when you find yourself in a situation where what is real and what is fake now, when you've got Elon Musk retweeting absolute crap on his platform with the 100% emoji, trying to underline and then saying, well, I only shared what I thought somebody said. What is the sharing of fake news or sharing fake information now? We're in an absolute mess, and hopefully the Online Safety Act might get us into a position where some of this can be tidied up.
We will watch with interest. Will Guyatt, always a pleasure. Thank you. That's Will, Talks Tech correspondent with us. I think you've got to be careful what you wish for. Something comes under the banner of online safety. Well, we all agree with, kids seeing horrendous stuff. We don't want that. We don't want people showing decapitation or ejaculation, frankly, on just the press of a button on a social media platform. But I do want controversial talk, and I don't want that to go away. Speaking of which, after the news at 4, here's a man that tells it like it is and punches at 1,000 miles an hour. He is James Max, who's here after the news.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon
what
to
a
you.
pleasure. I mean, I think you've almost reached national treasure status, haven't you?
Do you think so?
Oh,
I don't know
yes.
about that. I don't know about that.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
we
maybe,
all do.
Maybe. We've been around for a while, James.
We have indeed.
What's going on after 4? It's oddly, I was saying, by the way, sorry to interject, considering it's Christmas, there's a lot of news around.
There is a lot of news around. We'll be focusing on the political parties. As you might imagine, there's quite a lot of jostling between them, particularly between Reform and the Conservatives, and we will be asking, where have the Tories gone wrong?
Yeah.
In the sense that we've all discussed the rise of Reform, perhaps we understand that narrative, and perhaps we all know where and how the wheels have fallen off Labour. We obviously haven't seen the wheels fall off a political party since an election so quickly, probably in our lifetimes.
True.
But that's been well covered and well documented. But I don't think the Tories seem to know what to do, and I don't think they know what's gone wrong.
True.
But I'm sure that you listening will know.
It's interesting because you look back at... Do you remember when Boris Johnson was elected 2019 and everybody said, well, he's there for 10 years because you can't have a majority that big and then lose it, other than, really, really flunking it. And, you'd have to have Scotland also implode, and both of those things happened, and consequently he did lose it. So, but up to that point, it would have been unthinkable that Keir Starmer would have beaten Boris Johnson.
Well, I think part of the thing that the Tories have to look at is that they pushed Boris out. In addition to that, they allowed Boris to make appointments and to run things in a way that was inevitably going to lead with result in disaster. And disaster it was. He should never have been allowed to pick some of the people that he picked. He was the architect of